Can we broaden this conversation to something more practical? If the conversation is about centrism in general, let's say, does anyone think the left is categorically correct versus the right?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Explain that. Explain that.
Oh, I just think that they have better values, policies, record, and rhetoric compared to the right. I think that...
Do you believe in open borders?
No, but I don't think the left does either. You'd have to show me where the left does. Who's the left that believes? I was thinking, you know, like President Biden, you know, the most powerful man in the world, not, you know, a New York Times writer.
You're looking at it through the lens of political power, and I think political power is nothing compared to cultural
You're right.
power.
We should think about New York Times columnists. Much more powerful than the sitting president.
No.
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, one and all, to yet another episode of WhickTV, a cross-ideological space where we come together to talk about issues both political and cultural, from the silly to the serious, and, well, you will decide, dear audience, whether today is silly or serious. Today, we are being put on trial. And by we, I mean me specifically. And do I both sides things too much? Am I a centrist? Is centrism bad? Is it bad to both sides things? Is that even something we should be concerned about? Is the right graded on a curve when it comes by the general populace to things? Should we hold the right to a greater account because they have more power? All these and more. All these and more. But as it is a trial, we have a prosecution, we have a defense. The prosecution today, 𝙎𝙬 and dataless media. And later, when he gets here, Portland is burning, but he has he'll be here soon. For the defense, we have my Atticus Finch, Fairy Queen, and my Johnny Cochran, P.F. Young, who will be standing Whick throughout this. But as all trials do, we will allow the prosecution to make their case first. And so with that, I yield the floor to our brother in arms, 𝙎𝙬 and dataless. Go ahead.
I'm still trying. Oh, Portland's in. Wait a minute. Drag him in. He's in the backstage.
Oh,
yeah, Mr. Pibb.
Oh,
Natalie Portland.
Beautiful.
Portland, just to let you know, you are muted if you do not know.
Now your camera's gray, by the way.
Hang tight. I mean,
this is actually this is how he naturally looks. Just FYI, this is his true form.
Grayness.
So yeah. So the prosecution. So I wasn't exactly sure quite what the topic was. This was predicated over a Twitter back and forth that Daedalus, Portland, Whick and I had, and several others whose names I don't remember, but you were responding to a tweet from 𝙬𝙤 in the aftermath of the 𝙬𝙤-𝙬𝙤 conversation, where it was about the right wing versus the left wing, and 𝙬𝙤 made the case again that the right is expected to be, you know, treated with kid gloves, even though they constantly demonize the left. And then you came in and said, you know, hey, both sides demonize each other and we should probably stop. And then people were trying to make the case that you're both siding an issue where the demonization is greater on one side and has greater deleterious effects from one side. And so it triggered a back and forth. I'm sure we'll revisit the specific tweets, but just, I guess in a nutshell, if we're talking about centrism, I do think, number one, that power and responsibility scale. So I think if you have limited resources and finite attention, you should probably focus on those who have greater positions, greater power. They should be held to greater scrutiny, probably higher standards. Now, that said, I don't think that a person's political allegiance should necessarily dictate how you respond to them. So I gave you the example of a murderer. I think if a Democrat is convicted of murder and a Republican is convicted of murder, we were using the crime metaphors, they should be punished exactly the same because it's the same crime. The political allegiance is irrelevant. Power and influence, that to me is the thing you should that scales. So that's my position. I don't know where everybody else agrees. You told me you don't agree with that. You don't think that power and responsibility scale, which kind of surprised me because Uncle Ben from Spider-Man says the exact opposite. Shame on you for rejecting Spider-Man. And that alone should just yield a guilty conviction. That's where I stand.
Daedalus, I'll let you have your say, and then I'll let Portland have their say, and then the defense will get their turn. Go ahead.
All right. First of all, thanks again for having us, Whick. Always a good time. Yeah, I essentially agree. My day-to-day reality since becoming a content creator has become kind of buck wild. So we started this because you responded to a tweet Destiny made, who was responding to Brianna Wu, and I responded to you, and so suddenly here we are. But yeah, I just generally agree with Josiah here. We have to grade people who hold more power and influence with a much more severe, maybe be more severe on them than we otherwise would have. And seeing as the vast majority of action that comes out of these days comes from right-wing governments here in the United States, state governments in particular, I think focusing on them more is appropriate.
Okay, thanks for being here. Portland, what you got?
Hey, Wick. What's up, guys? Thanks for having me. Bridge building, centrism, the civility politics, whatever you want to call it in this space, it's an admirable goal. It's one that I think we can all appreciate. The desire for the left to wield more power politically and socially necessarily means that we need to do more to bring people that aren't already on the left side of the spectrum over to it. That being said, it requires a tremendous amount of tact, maturity, and grace to accomplish such a lofty goal, especially in such a toxic and volatile space. And I am unconvinced that your both sidesing of literally every issue under the sun is going to get us to a place where we can actually meaningfully build a broader coalition on the left. So I'm here to attack you and tell you you've done bad. Thank you for having me. Look forward to discussing the merits of your centrism.
Okay, well, first of all, not a centrist. I deny those allegations flat outright. But we'll get into it. Well, I'll also get into it, and I'm going to let Team Defense here go in a second. But we will also get into whether or not I both sides everything. I don't believe I do, but again, we'll present the evidence and we'll go forward. Also, my contention would be that yes, I think that whether you are rich or poor, whether you are powerful or weak, if you do something wrong, you should be held to account. And regardless, the level of status that you have should not influence the amount of punishment you receive for what you do. And so that will be my argument going forward. But I want to give it to my defense team, and we're going to start. Atticus Finch, Fairy Queen, go ahead. What you got for us?
Everyone. So I think that for those who are not familiar with the tweet, I'm going to read out exactly specifically what it says, specifically what the Destiny tweet is, and specifically what Whick said. So I will be very honest, I did not follow through Josiah's, Daedalus's, or Portalus Burning's, each and every single one of your discourses, your conversations. So I don't know beyond your opening statements what it was specifically that you had to say. So I'm hoping that we can get into it. But this is exactly what Whick's tweet was. We are in a period where everyone is viewing those on the other side not only as a political opponent, but an apocalyptic threat and an enemy to all that is good and holy. Everyone just needs to stop treating everyone else as inhuman, left, right, and center. So that is the tweet that started this firestorm. And this was a response to a Destiny tweet that says, seriously, where are the conservatives saying that they need to treat people on the left with compassion? Have they not spent the past 2 years essentially claiming that LGBTQ people are pedophilic groomers? LOL. And I have a few, and this is my response to that. So number one, I completely agree with everything the opposition said about holding people who are in positions of power to account and to responsibility. We should hold people in positions of authority, especially if they are Republican politicians in positions of authority, to higher standards of account. However, there are a few things I have a question about. Number one, the perception of who is in power and the perception of who it is that we hold to account. So the example that was given by Destiny is groomers. If you click onto any libs of TikTok, if you click onto libs of TikTok, if you click onto Michael Knowles or Matt Walsh, the overwhelming consensus upon each of their platforms is that it is not, in fact, the conservative right who is in power. The perception amongst many conservatives is in fact, that it is the left that is imposing influence upon the school system and imposing influence upon various social issues. I'd also like to dial back the clock to 2016 to remind everyone of what the consequences of political polarization are. One of them has to do, and at that time, that was the election of Donald Trump. There's a great article on crack.com. It's very informal, but it's called 6 Reasons Trump's Rise That Nobody Talks About. And one of the reasons that it gives is that it's not about red states versus blue states. It's about the country versus the city. So the example that it gave, for instance, if you look at that time in 2016, Illinois, for instance, you'll notice that even though it's a blue state, the counties specifically that turn blue are all located within urban areas. And if you look specifically at the conservative counties that exist within that state, all of those counties that are conservative, the vast majority of them exist in the countryside. That's a big deal. That means that a wide majority of people who are voting conservative, who identify as conservative, are living literally very different lives than those who live in cities. Their lives and the consequences and the trials that they face are very different. And so when we're talking about this perception of power, I would ask everyone, if you're living in the countryside and if you're twice as likely to own a gun, you're more likely to get married younger. People in the urban blue areas, they talk faster, they walk faster. They're more likely to be drug abusers, but they're less likely to be alcoholics. People who live in these blue areas are less likely to own land. And more importantly, they're less likely to be evangelical Christians, which is a big deal to these places, which means that when you're talking to a lot of conservatives, it might actually be true that conservative politicians do maintain a lot of power, but the majority of people who you speak to do not have that perception, which is why it's important to stand centrism. It's important to build that bridge over for that reason, if we care about democracy. Secondly, number 2, the impact on personal relationships. I realize that when we're probably going to talk a lot about policies and legislation, I'm going to give you an example of one of the consequences of political polarization. Has everybody seen the tweet with 𝙎𝖎𝖏, where he's talking about liberal women who date conservative men?
Yes. Yes.
So that clip basically said that liberal men who choose to date conservative men essentially are bending their moral principles and values, that they are weak. And basically, he smeared liberal women who make the decision to date across the political spectrum. That is incredibly toxic and not good. Okay, that is a divisive thing to be promoting amongst. It's an example of one of the ways in which political polarization has not just seeped into the way that we talk about policies, but also into the way that we manage our everyday relationships. I currently work in academia. I work in the English department. If you are a conservative person in the English department, it is nearly impossible for you to speak on any of the issues within a class. It's very difficult for your work to be published from a conservative literary basis and in peer-reviewed journals. And for all of these reasons, and I don't want to talk for too long, I understand where the opposition is coming from, but I am still skeptical. And I worry that were we to support their ideas, that it would actually degrade our ability to exist as a democracy.
𝙬 is a threat to democracy. I like this take. We're going to see how this goes and works out for you. Okay, next up, P.F. Young, what you got for us?
Yes, well, first off, well said, Atticus. I don't know what the tweet, I didn't know this was based off of a tweet. What Atticus read just now seemed perfectly reasonable. I don't see how anyone could disagree with what Whick stated. So, I also don't understand. I mean, this is a broader conversation about centrism and balance. And it is impossible for me to understand, even for a second, the perspective that the balanced middle way is not the correct perspective. Pick every single issue, there is a centrist, correct, balanced middle way position. On abortion, does life begin at conception? No, of course not. Should abortion be allowed up until 9 months? No, of course not. On immigration, should we have open borders? No, of course not. Should we have no immigration whatsoever?
Wait.
No, of course not. Can I finish my opening statement.
Sorry.
Good grief.
Please.
Johnny Cochran
Goodness
is speaking right
gracious.
here. I have a high-end client I need to protect.
Go ahead.
Fair
On
enough. My
every issue,
apologies.
there is a correct, balanced middle perspective. And on every issue, there's an extreme left-wing and extreme right-wing perspective. If you agree that the right can go too far and that the left can go too far, then there must be some balanced middle perspective. Now, I, of course, as an enlightened centrist, agree that, like Whick, no true centrist would identify as centrist. 𝙇𝙤𝙗 does more good than anyone for the centrist cause. By calling conservatives retards, he appeals to exactly the kind of left-wing people who would normally be swept up in the postmodern neo-Marxist far-left agenda and push for, let's have 13-year-olds get their breasts cut off because they say, I feel like a girl. 𝙇𝙤𝙗 opposes that. And perhaps the only way that a significant number of people on the left would agree with that position is if someone like 𝙇𝙤𝙗 calls conservative retards, and then those people go, oh, I like this guy, so I'm also going to agree with his more reasonable opinions, the centrist balanced opinions. So I don't even begin to understand how categorically correct or the right is categorically correct. Am I still here?
Yeah, no, you just you cut out there for a second, but I think we got what you were saying, so it was only a moment.
Okay, all right, yes. So, Whick, you can deny your centrism all along, but you're a good guy, and you're doing a lot of good things, which makes you centrist by definition.
Interesting definition of centrism. I don't
Johnny
know if
Cochran
I agree
has
with it, but again, microphone.
Real quick, I would argue the
Oh, go ahead.
characterization that anything in between those two polar extremes is a centrist position. I don't think that that's an
I don't think I
accurate
didn't say
characterization.
anything in between. I said the correct
You
position.
literally described positions that are very left of center, like abortion access up to second trimester, and things that are obviously left of center. They are positions that are between those two extremes, but to characterize them as centrist positions, I don't think that's correct.
I didn't say all those positions are centrist. I said the correct position is centrist because it is in between
I
those
think
two
what's
extremes.
more
but you cited
Well, how am I wrong? Does anyone here think that
centrist
abortion
position
should be
a
illegal?
centrist position is by definition a correct position, because what that's really describing is gray fallacy, where one side says X, the other side says Y, and you assume the answer is somewhere in the middle, which is not necessarily true.
Yes,
It's
but
the
it
golden
usually
means
is.
fallacy. So
Yeah,
so
but
you don't.
it's not a. Well, I wouldn't call it a fallacy. It's a rule of thumb, and it's a correct rule of thumb.
So you don't think the golden means fallacy is like actually a thing that literally between any issue,
I'm sure you can throw it around.
Yeah, but just
I'm asking
it's
if you
not,
believe
there's
it.
no meaningful statement in there's two extremes and the correct position is somewhere in the middle. If it's 2 degrees right,
that is true. Does everyone here agree with
that?
that? Hold on. Does everyone here agree with that?
No, that's obviously correct in like its basic
hold on.
logic,
Portland
and
just
it's
said it's
also
obviously
not
correct,
an
and
intellectually
Josiah-
honest position to take.
Portland just said it's obviously correct, and Josiah just said no. So why don't you two hash out your disagreement?
Obviously literally correct in that if you accept that the two extreme points on the spectrum are probably not the correct points ideologically in any given space. Yes, technically the correct answer is going to land somewhere in between those two extremes, but that doesn't make it a centrist position. That just means it's somewhere
that's your
on
semantic game.
No, I'm saying the spectrum of all possibilities isn't a meaningful insight.
I don't believe in the spectrum of all possibilities. I don't think
just-
abortion should be. Can I finish my point? I don't think abortion should be legal after 1 day after conception. I don't think it should be legal 2 days after conception. Or excuse me, I don't think it should be illegal 1 day after conception or 2 days. It should be illegal somewhere after, I don't know, a month and a half, 2 months or something, when it's reasonably assumed that the fetus could feel pain. That's a philosophical position that isn't just arbitrarily put between two extremes.
That's absolutely arbitrarily put between two extremes. You have no basis for assuming a fetus between 5 and 11 weeks.
I don't want to get into very specific policy. Just real quick, as a rule of thumb here, I don't want to get this. I don't want to go down a abortion rabbit hole or any specific one policy rabbit hole here. We're not here to
Can you
discuss...
never use the term abortion rabbit hole again, please? It's just kind of like
fair enough. But the what we are here to talk about today is both sidesing, right? And centrism in general, as well as are both parties. Should they be held to the same standards, and should they be held to the same account? And
Who disagrees with that? Does anyone disagree with that?
Do you disagree?
What I disagree with is the assertion that people in different stations of authority and public trust should be held to the same standard, which is a take that you doubled down on in this initial opening. The idea that a politician and your average person on Twitter can both directly, knowingly lie, and they should be held to the same standards. That two people, a police officer that murders someone and an individual on the street that murders someone, that there should be no difference in the standards applied, is just obviously something that I think flies in the face of putting people in, the principle of vesting responsibility and authority in certain individuals. The whole point is that they need to be held to a higher degree of responsibility with that authority that they wield. And I don't know how you can disagree with that.
Atticus, aka Fairy Queen,
Fairy Queen
also
seemed to agree.
agreed to that. I'm curious if PF.
What are your thoughts?
What do you think?
PF,
do you think powered? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I don't actually agree with that. Well, I don't know. The example you gave of a cop and a murderer. If a cop kills someone, if a cop murders someone, he's a murderer. He should be held to the same standard as every murderer.
Obviously,
already in a position of public trust.
If a famous,
how is that? Are you joking?
Yeah, I don't understand.
So if a cop kills someone in cold blood, he should be held to a greater punishment than someone else who killed someone in cold blood and robbed a mother,
at the very
potentially
least, a greater degree of social scrutiny. Not necessarily legal scrutiny in every case, but social scrutiny at the very least.
What does that mean?
What do you mean? What does it mean? That we condemn people on a level of, based on the level of responsibility that society is
about it on
vested
Twitter
in them.
More?
Holy shit!
Let me
bit more reductive and
let me dial it back. Let me dial it back.
Quickly.
Let me dial it back a little bit, and then maybe we can explore it further. So, PF, I'm sure you're familiar with I call it the Uncle Ben ethic, but you could say noblesse oblige. You could say whatever you want.
That.
The idea,
great power comes great responsibility.
Yes.
And with
Do you like it now that it's a comic book metaphor? No shit. How have you not tracked that yet? He already said it once.
Young man, Whick, I'm gonna need some time to make my response to Portland here. Portland, you gave a shit example of the cop and the murderer, which is why I disputed that.
I gave you a very...
Stop! Is this on? Gang, is this on? I wanted to make sure that Josiah finished his point before we could respond to him. And then so once Josiah finishes his point, I would like to hear from Young, uninterrupted. I'm looking at you, Portland. And then you can respond if you want.
Yeah, I just thought that maybe because I feel like we were close to consensus with the exception of Whick. The four of us here, three of the prosecution and one of the defense, agrees with the idea that with great power comes great responsibility, and power and responsibility scale. The more power you have, the more responsibility. Do you agree with that?
True.
Okay. So we've got at least a foundation in terms of how that should be actualized, in terms of policy, in terms of scrutiny, in terms of accountability. What does that look like to you? Because you agree with the ethic, at least in principle, but when Portland, Mr. Pibb gave you the example of yes. So where's the disconnect?
Terrible example.
Well, that's fine, but where's
shit? It's a pretty easy example to track. I'm sorry you can't. I'm sorry you're having such a hard time with it.
I forgive you.
Taking someone's life. Yeah.
Taking someone's life is arguably the most significant moral crime one can make.
Okay.
So for us to say, well, let's take the most extreme moral crime that one can make and say, well, if you have a cop uniform on, it's not as bad. Or
worse.
Effectively what you're saying.
No, it's
the opposite. Just real quick.
Oh, I'm sorry. So so if I break into someone's house and murder someone, but I'm not a cop, that in the final analysis, that's not as bad as if a cop did that. I reject that.
Yeah, a cop is absolutely in a greater position of social and legal responsibility not to commit.
You're imposing this
aggressive murder.
Right. Well, the mother. Let's say it's a 25-year-old man who gets murdered in either instance. The mother of that 25-year-old man, the consequences to her are exactly the same no matter who murders her son. And
no, they're not. That person is never going to trust a police officer again. That shattering perception of the legal framework that you rely on to save your life in an emergency has a fundamentally different impact on the way that you live the rest of your life versus just a random stranger murdering.
That's not true.
Yes, it is. Obviously, it is.
I can give you an example of how that's not true.
It's obviously true. You can give me all the examples you want. You're wrong.
Okay, well, you're a religious person then. You could just said you could give me all the examples proving you discorrect, and you still wouldn't believe it. So never mind. Josiah, you're the more reasonable one.
Discorrect isn't a thing.
I would like to minimize the interaction I have with Portland and maximize the interaction I have with Josiah, because that's much more.
I see you, Fairy Queen, as well. So once you two go back and forth, I want to get.
Well, I was just gonna say. So I'll be honest with you. I'm struggling with it too, because it seems like I'm not saying that this is necessarily the case, but it seems to me that the two positions are mutually exclusive, right? If you believe that with great power comes great responsibility, and power and responsibility scale, but in effect that a person with power and a person with no power should be held to the same standards. I see these as like mutually exclusive. Can you? You gave the example of murder. Is that, right. I guess, is murder
that's
the
the ultimate power? To take someone's life is more powerful than.
Can you give me an example of where you would hold a cop making some sort of transgression to a higher standard than someone who isn't a cop?
Sure. If they commit some sort of fraud in terms of they're filling out a report and they lie about it, they plant evidence on someone. Well, like what? Is that equivalent to a random shoplifter or something? No, of course not.
No. Well, no.
The crime itself, by definition, is an equivalent crime. Then they're held to the same standard.
So to clarify, then your position is power and responsibility scale, and with great power comes great responsibility, and again, right. so on and so forth. But if a person in power and a person who's not in power or powerless or less powerful commit the exact same crime, the standard is the same.
I mean, I suppose I would be curious to see if I say yes or no to this, what is the next logical conclusion of that? I guess I feel like I'm getting lost in this. I mean, I agree great power comes great responsibility, and the more power you have, the more responsibility you have. And perhaps you should be held to greater account if the power that you have allows you to affect more people. I contended the murder example in part because Portland seems like an annoying person, and I just wanted to push back on that.
Yeah, and in part because you're stupid.
It's such a bad example.
You could just track the example instead of being a petty piece of shit.
Finish my point?
I would like to talk, but...
Yeah, we'll get you in, Portland.
Don't make little comments. Don't make little comments if you want me to listen
I'm
to
just
you
saying. I'm just saying what
I'm just saying. Quit running your dumb mouth.
Okay. Wow. Gang.
How about we scale this out? This is I think that,
take it from a 10.
I agree with
take
the
it
premise.
from a 10 to a 5.
I agree with the premise. Great power comes great responsibility. Wick, what do you disagree with?
Sure.
With
so
me on that?
Again, what happens is by responsibility, I have to interrogate what that means, because in most cases, I would agree with you. But when it comes to what I feel, based on the conversations I've had before with all these gentlemen here, of what they mean by it, I think it's substantively different things. So I am absolutely with them when they say, and with you, when you say anyone who murders, regardless of who is doing the murdering, should be held to the same standard as anyone else who murders, right? A lot of these positions of power should be held to more scrutiny. We should be more careful. Why? Because they have a greater ability to commit a crime. But if I, as a non-officer of the state, non-ward of the state, no one of any consequence or responsibility, was able to plant evidence somehow into a police precinct that led to the false conviction and accusation of a citizen, I should be held to account for that, just as if a police officer had. So whether, again, the harm is the same, whether or a cop does it, whether a rich man does it, or whether a poor man does it, whether a politician does it, or whether a random person on the street does it. If you do a thing that causes harm, you should be held to the same standard. Because how this works out in principle, when we have these different standards, is the rich get away with it. The rich get away with it. That's what happens. And so, to tie this into the more discussion about politics, when I see the left doing the same thing that the right does, even though they may not have, in whatever locality they exist in, the same political or legislative power, I still think we should call it out with the same veracity that we do when the Republicans do it. And there's plenty of reasons for this, right? People won't trust you if you only are always calling out one Trump. I hate it. I hate it so much that every time I want to criticize someone who is remotely left-leaning, I feel like I have to say 40 Hail Marys, which is like 40 Trump bads, before I get and genuflect before I'm able to even give the
Actually
mildest
43 now.
criticism.
Inflation has increased. It's actually 43 Trump bad.
Fair
guys.
enough,
Centrist
fair enough.
Whick
But
is in Super Saiyan right
this
now.
isn't centrism though. This is progressivism.
Oh, it is. Call it what you want, Wick, but you are
This is
embodying.
Can I hear
of
what
balance.
Fairy Queen?
Go ahead, Fairy
with
Queen. Sorry, I
Atticus?
didn't want to rant too much, but yeah.
That was well said, Wick.
I'm going to have to
Oh.
disagree with the first half of what Whick said. And I'm sorry, PF Young, I know that you're on my side, but I am going to have to disagree with you that the idea that like we hold private individuals exactly the same in all in terms of law is when we're talking as public officials. So I'll give you a very concrete example of where this is not true and it's inscribed in law. So libel is an example of this, okay, right? So if you are a public figure, in order to actually prove that libel has occurred against you, you actually are held legally at a much higher standard. So if you are trying to prove libel in court, for instance, the defendant has to prove, you have to prove that the defendant acted with actual malice making the defamatory statement. But if the plaintiff is a private figure, the First Amendment does not impose any restriction on the liability standards that states may adopt. And there are other laws that we can find. The obvious point that even if it's technically morally the same, well, we can argue whether or not it's morally the same. But the fact of the matter is, if you are a therapist, for instance, and you sexually abuse your client, you're going to lose your license, right? That means you're not going to be able to work anymore, right?
Good.
As opposed to if you're a farmer and you're off in the middle of the road and you just sell vegetables, if you're convicted of committing a sex offense, you will still be able to sell your vegetables on the side of the road, right? That's an example of how we punish public figures, or we punish some people that we put with private with public trust.
Just real quick, Fairy Queen, if that same farmer,
Oh my God, you're interrupting her? Seriously?
I am interrupting her because I'm curious. I'm asking
This is
a
his
question.
show.
She's barely.
Oh my!
I know. I'm asking a question. She's still going to get to talk. I just want to
leftist,
interrogate this for a moment. That same farmer who sexually assaults someone also will not be able to get a therapy job later, right?
Correct.
They will be held to that same standard. So I
Well,
don't.
they are held to the same. Well, but still, the point is, like, if you are somebody who works as a therapist, that means that you've been trained as a therapist. It means that you've worked as a therapist. It means that that is your primary source of income, right? So your primary source of income has been taken away from you. You now have to find a different job. That's the point. But I want to scale this back because I do want to talk about this point about power and responsibility, which I do agree with. I do think that when we're talking about leftist, liberal public officials, we should hold people that we should hold people who are on the left, who are public officials and who are in positions of power of responsibility, we should hold them as much to account as those who are on the right. Obviously, I agree with that. I think that's very true and very fair to point out. But here's my question to you. Who is it that you are talking about when you say those in power and responsibility? Are we talking about politicians? Are you talking about political pundits like Matt Walsh or Michael Knowles? Because as I mentioned before, I promise you, if you go to many of the districts and the counties for the people who are voting and who support these content creators and who support these politicians, these people do not feel that they are full of power. Most of them feel significantly disempowered, right? It's the reason why people like Matt Walsh or Michael Knowles have great sway over them. So who is it that we're talking about? Because I don't disagree. If you want to dunk on Matt Walsh and Michael Knowles, absolutely, right? It's a different thing, though, when you're dunking on an average conservative person in a small town.
I initially was referring to elected officials.
Okay.
As a very narrow case, I would hold elected officials at a much higher standard than I would people who are not elected.
Well, and we have a pretty high profile, pretty immediate, relevant example that we can point to with like the ongoing charges being filed against the Trump, against Trump for his election efforts in 2020. The tweets that he put out, the things that he said that he's being charged for, obviously you wouldn't be charged for if you were just like a normal person saying them and trying to rile up individuals. He's being charged for them because of his platform, his ability to mobilize people, and his ability to affect the level of like public turnout and public disruption that we saw on January 6th. So.
He engaged in conspiracy, right? But that's even just a legal consideration. I think also too ethics. So Trump is a good example. Trump was during the big lie, he was the sitting president of the United States. He was the most powerful man on the planet. He has more responsibility and more obligation to behave ethically than anybody. It's the same thing with President Biden. President Biden is now the most powerful person on the planet. He has more responsibility to behave ethically than a senator, than a governor, than a congressperson. They, in turn, have more responsibility to behave ethically and so on and so forth than the average citizen. Power and responsibility scale, both ethically and, in my opinion, more often than not legally. So I think Trump is a great example. I'll also just say real quick, just because you pointed out Michael Knowles and Matt Walsh, I also think even within informal de facto power, so influence, I think that's also the case. If you are a high-profile influencer, if you command the support of hundreds of thousands or millions of people, if you say stupid shit on Twitter, I do think more scrutiny should be put on you. If like, for example, if when Michael Knowles says or Matt Walsh says something like transgenderism needs to be eradicated, that should get more scrutiny and attention and pushback than some random 5-account or 5-follower account saying the same thing. I believe Whick disagrees. I 100% believe Whick disagrees. Right.
I do.
So to me, that I can't process that. I struggle with that. So maybe somebody can make a persuasive case here, because to me, legal power and informal power, the responsibility associated with it scales. I'm sorry. Go ahead, PF.
I'll let PF go, but then I'll explain.
Whick, go ahead.
Okay, sure. So the reason that we hold both the Michael Knowles of the world and the rando lefty who tells people who doxes someone, right, on their job or something to the same account is because while one may not at this present time have as much power, right? How they act without power, with the little stewardship they have, is probably indicative how they would act when they have more power, when they are stewards of a larger portion. So we want to nip that problem in the bud. The only reason we'd give more attention, right, to the person who is more powerful is because they are more popular and they are easier to see. And in fact, there's this insidious nature, this cell-like structure. It's how a lot of terrorist groups operate, right? They're very small in power, but they're very effective because they're hard to pin down. They've got all this plausible deniability. It's really hard to kind of, they're very slippery and they're very hard to deal with, because even though they have very, very little power, right, numbers-wise, but they punch above their weight because of their small stature and nature. So when we talk about some of the extreme problems on the left, like, and these small little no follower accounts, there's not just one of these people doing it. There is a multitude of these. It's like a pack of piranhas in a way, and they absolutely have devastating effects on people's jobs, people's livelihoods, people's trust. They have done harm, and it bothers me that we can rightly point to the harm that the right does and is currently doing and say that's wrong and bad and we should condemn it with all our hearts, and we should, but then just sweep it under the rug when the left does it because, they don't have power. This power dynamic thing is wild to me. Like, just because this person has less status than this other person, we're going to hold them to a different standard? Why?
Triage. Like, you're the physician in the ER room who gets a patient wheeled in with a stick of rebar through his chest, and you're complaining about his cholesterol. You got to triage, buddy.
It's again,
yeah.
If you are a police officer and you have 2 calls come in, one of them is like someone's attacking people with a knife, and one of them somebody is like open fire in a mall. Which one do you respond to and why? Like, where is the urgency and why? It's with the greater capacity to cause immediate harm, right? It's the person who's shooting the gun, probably. Yes. Right. That is the greater capacity to cause immediate harm is a part of the equation that I feel like you're ignoring when you're saying the capacity to have future capacity to cause greater harm.
Well, let's look at this capacity.
Their
impact. Sure, let's look at the capacity.
Hang on. Can I just say? I'm sorry. Can I just say? In this example, if you could, I feel like your justification would be go after the knife guy because he could eventually go out and buy a gun. No, you should go after the gun wielder first.
Because again, my argument here is that both groups have guns. One is just shooting up people we don't fucking care about, and the other is shooting up people we do. Right? Like, so again, we try to minimize, and even in these analogies, we're minimizing the effects that's happening here. Like the right, let's be honest, these laws that they're passing, like Trump is going to jail. The institutions are handling this shit. Right? They are taking these people to task. Their laws are being overturned in the courts again and again and again. We are seeing them being BTFO'd in the midterms. We are seeing that the right is getting handled. But we tend not to handle the left. It's a festering problem, a boiling thing under the surface that we're just refusing to look at because this one is loud and flashy. But my argument is that both of these have potentials for harm that are pretty much the same. Maybe not now in this second and in this moment, but if we do not handle our shit, it will become a problem that we cannot handle. Better to nip it in the bud now.
Agreed.
Because it's easier to deal with now than when they get power,
may I speak?
right?
Whick,
Yes,
may
you
I?
may. PF Young, go ahead.
Can we broaden this conversation to something more practical? I utterly disagree with the idea that the left has less power than the right, all things considered. Who thinks that the
most people? I think most people would argue it's the other way around.
No,
like,
that's not at all
culturally and
the case.
politically, the left has more power at the moment.
Oh, okay, yes, agreed.
Yeah, we have.
So how does it? What is this whole conversation about?
I got drawn into it on the responsibility component. I am obviously I'm not sure where it ties into our behavior across the political dichotomy, the left and the right. You'll have to clarify that a little bit for me.
And Whick, you can tell me if we want to move, if we want to change, not go down this path.
Go ahead.
If the conversation is about centrism in general, let's say. My original point, who does anyone think that the left categorically is in the right versus does anyone think the left is categorically correct versus the right?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, 100%.
Okay,
yeah.
Explain that.
Oh, I just think that they have better values, policies, record, and rhetoric compared to the right. I think that.
Do you believe in open borders?
No, but I don't think the left does either. You'd have to show me where the left does. Who's the left that believes?
Well, hold on. First off, the left.
I was thinking, President Biden, the most powerful man in the world, not a New York Times writer, and I don't know if he believes in open borders.
Well, I don't think. Well, hold on.
Border enforcement is continuing.
First off, I wouldn't say President Biden, in theory, is the most powerful person in the world. I don't think anyone actually believes that he's the one making decisions. But you're also looking at you think that you're looking at it through the lens of political power. And I think political power is nothing compared to cultural power.
You're right. We should think about New York Times columnists. Much more powerful than the sitting president.
No, we should think about significant cultural figures. Like Matt Walsh is
I think Joe Biden wields more cultural power by far than Ezra Klein. By far.
Hold on. That we could argue about. But let me just point this out.
Fair enough.
Matt Walsh has no political power to speak of. But he is definitely a danger worth addressing. Correct?
Yes, there are different types of power. 100%. There's de jure political power. There's cultural power. Yes, but I wouldn't.
I said cultural power is more important in the long term.
Cultural power bleeds into political power if you can directly influence people's political
positions
and compel them to act in certain ways.
Problematic.
Do we agree that the statement "politics is downstream from culture" is correct? Does anyone dispute that?
No, probably not.
Okay, so
I think there's a feedback loop.
There is, sure, but
I think there's a feedback
loop.
But
again, making a clear distinction between how types of power interact differently isn't really useful because they all feed into one another. Political power is affected by your personal power, is affected by your charisma, etc., etc., etc. So, it's trying to say that this solely cultural power is more important.
How does that dispute the fact that we should and I believe
I'll be right back. I got to grab a drink. I'll be right back.
Portland said that the cultural left is more powerful and the political left is more powerful. So I don't see how this relates to. I guess what is the fundamental argument here? My position is,
if I understand it correctly,
the left is as worthy of criticism as the right. It's indisputable. I don't even know how you could argue against that. How does anyone argue against that?
I want to hear Fairy Queen's point here because she's been trying to get into.
Again, I have a question for the opposing side. So if we're really talking, so I understand and I completely agree that I'm glad that Trump has been indicted. I agree, dunking on Matt Walsh and Michael Knowles based But nevertheless, the question is, but the problem is that Matt Walsh and Michael Knowles, the reason why they have the platforms that they do is because they have an audience of a lot of people who agree with what he has to say, right? If they did not agree, if they were not listening to what he had to say, these people would not have a platform. And the conservatives who have been elected into office, they would not have been elected unless a wide swath of people wanted to vote them into office. So my question to you then is, it seems to me like the reason why I am on this side of the aisle is because while I don't disagree that it's important to criticize heavily and strongly people who are elected into positions of authority, right? The way that I'm not sure if being completely, I'm not sure, how do I phrase this? I think that if you want to elect people or to find replacements for those people, you're going to have to appeal to conservatives to switch over to blue, right? You're going to have to appeal to that population. How are you planning to do that? And also to maintaining this hardline stance? Because that's what I'm concerned of. I don't think that achieving political success and also having this purity test and holding everyone to account in this harsh way is actually going to be successful, practically speaking.
Well, for the record, I mean, I'm not sure because I was unfortunately, I was gone for the first half of that. But I don't think that. I think your rhetoric and your approach depends on the circumstance, right? So again, this kind of goes back to the conversation that Destiny and I had with Adam and Sitch, which ultimately was the initial predicate of this entire thing because he was going back and forth, kind of relitigating this issue. Is if I'm having a conversation, just a blunt, honest conversation about the state of American politics, I'm probably going to be much harsher in my rhetoric about the Republican Party and the modern conservative movement. Now, full disclosure, I was born in a red rural state. I grew up in a red rural state. I would say 60 to 70% of the people in my life, friends and family, are conservative. I don't go up to my four sisters and say, you are demonic pieces of shit, go die. Number one, I don't believe it. Number two, even if I did believe it, that would just not be an effective approach to de-radicalize them. But I also think, as Destiny pointed out in that conversation, there is a time and a place where you just have to call a spade, right? So I'm not going to pretend, unless I feel like it is rhetorically effective to do so in a certain situation, that MAGA, which I consider the core of Trump's base, the people who thought the 2020 election was stolen, that
what
want to
percentage
overturn.
of Republicans is that?
About
It depends.
50%.
Yeah, it depends.
50 to 55.
Right, 40, 50 million people?
That's not, no, I mean, there's about 40.
How many people voted for Trump in the last election?
70 million, right?
It was 65 or no 69 million. Yeah, but
So give
70
me a number
million.
of how many
70
people you're
million.
talking about. How many people are you
People
talking
who,
about?
out of people
I'm not
who
asking
identify
you,
as
young man.
Republicans.
Your city is burning.
It would be.
Jesus Christ. Do you
almost
do you have the
certainly.
capacity to go through one interaction without being a piece of shit? I'm just trying to answer your question.
Excuse me, young man. I'm trying to talk to the mature person here.
So the answer is no. The answer is no. I'm immature? Motherfucker, you can't get through one sentence without being a petty prick. Don't talk to me about maturity.
May I cut in? I'm so sorry. I would like an answer. Thank you, Josiah, for answering my question. But I would like to hear from Daedalus and from Portland. What is your response to that? And thank you, Josiah.
See, that's centrism. That's unhealthy centrism. I just want to hear from both sides. No, I want to hear from the reasonable person on the panel, which is Josiah. And I haven't heard much from Daedalus, but I certainly ruled out Portland so far. But I guess it's up to you.
So your question, as I understand it, is how do we propose to get people on our platform and speak to conservatives? I'll be perfectly honest. There is a lot that goes into that from a political perspective in the United States. We have, and in both parties have engaged in it, but it's much more pronounced on the right. We have an imbalance in how elections are shaped because of gerrymandering. So I have a feeling that, you made the example in your opening statement of Chicago and Illinois. I come from Chicago. I lived there for 10 years in the city proper and in the metropolitan area for a good 20. And there are an awful lot of people who are in that sea of blue who are Republicans. And in that huge sea of red down south, there are an awful lot of people who are Democrats. And the end result of an election map is not necessarily indicative of the reality of people's views. So I don't think I don't think I would take it as you have to go in and appeal to everyone. You just have to appeal to certain people, because that end result of that equation isn't really what we're looking for. It's the end result of how our political system is structured, but not what people really believe.
Well, I guess I would have a response to that, 𝙠𝙚. So I would agree, but isn't the population of people we would ideally want to be, isn't that the people that wind up in the voting booths, which is the reason why those counties have turned red or have turned blue? Like, I don't disagree. I'm sure that there are a lot of Republicans who live in Chicago, and I'm sure that there are plenty of Democrats who live in the sea of red down south. But the point is, like, when it came time to vote, those people did not wind up at the voting booth, right? It's why those counties turned the way that they did. So if you mean like we should specifically target, a campaign towards who is actually going to wind up at the voting booth, right? I think you're still going to wind up with the same problem, right? How are you going to get the people that go there to vote differently? You're still back to square one.
Well, so there's another part to that too, is not everyone votes, and an exceedingly small number of people actually vote in elections. So like, you can change those things by making some structural changes to the way we do elections. Like, make Election Day a federal holiday. Everyone's off. No one has to leave work. No one has to try to get off work and lose pay, that sort of thing. That would make a huge difference in who is voting.
Make permanent COVID era accommodations with respect to voting to maximize eligible voter turnout.
I live in Colorado now, and we have a very high election turnout because everyone here can mail in their ballot.
Yeah, we live in Washington, just north of me. Their mail-in ballot system has worked very well and is basically like the universal method of voting for the state. It's been working well for a very long time. And to address Fairy Queen's point, I think it is really important to have civil discourse with people on the right and people in the center. I just don't think that it's intellectually honest or helpful to the left cause to treat people who equivocate between the rhetoric following the 2016 election and the rhetoric following the 2020 elections. I don't think it's politically or practically helpful to treat people who say, well, Hillary called the election illegitimate too and did the exact same thing that Trump did. Like,
sure, that's both sided.
Intellectually,
I agree with you.
Yeah.
I agree with you. Yeah. That's both sided. But that's not what I'm talking about, and that's not what I do, right? I don't give credence to that. You've seen my tweets. You follow me. I think all of you follow me on social media, right? I don't do that, right? I don't engage in that kind of both sidesism. What I do is when I see the left doxing people, well, I'll give you two examples that happened just recently on the left that I got very angry at because, well, when the right does this, I get angry too, right? But I saw it on the left recently, and so I attacked it on the left. One, people mocking someone's sexual assault and calling their story a lie and trying to paint it out as a lie. I'm talking about the Anna Kasparian thing, right? That was disgusting, okay? And I stand by that. The second thing is people painting the Richmond, north of Richmond guy as a pedo. I saw 𝙎𝙬𝙚 Left, of all people, right, make that kind of like an accusation, like that he was being pro-Epstein with his lyrics, which on the face of it was just extremely, extremely dishonest. And so, yes, and the reason we have to call out the left with the same vociferousness that we do the right is about credibility, okay? Because we want people to take us seriously when we call out the right. We don't want to be seen as shills, ideologues, cheerleaders, etc. What we want to be doing, and what will actually win people over, in my honest opinion, is being seen as fair, balanced, and an honest actor in this space. And I don't think we can be fundamentally an honest actor unless when we see something, we say something, and we don't check to see if there's a D or an R in front of their name before we decide how vociferously we respond to what we see that is wrong. That's all I say.
I got a question for you. So the first thing, the first thing when you were describing, so some of this I'd not heard of, the 𝙎𝙬𝙚 Left thing. So when the accusation that this country music guy, the one who put out this song, is like a pedophile or whatever,
or in pro-Epstein language, there was one person who was in 𝙎𝙬𝙚 Left who just is this guy a pedo? It just asked it directly, but 𝙎𝙬𝙚 Left, to his credit, was more kind of a sly
I think
implication. Does that make sense?
I think a like seriously insinuating without evidence that a person is, you know, is engaged in that sort of heinous behavior with that sort of social stigma behind it, that's inappropriate, number one. But I'm curious, what makes you angrier? This is the first question. What makes you angrier? When 𝙎𝙪𝙗𝙚 or somebody insinuates that a country music singer is a pedo, or when Marjorie Taylor Greene calls every Democrat a pedophile?
Both
Which
make
one
me
is
angry.
which one I understand that, and they can make you both angry, but is there a degree? Do they make you equally angry? Do they make you?
Well,
Does
I
one make
know
you?
𝙎𝙪𝙗𝙚
Or how
left.
about
He's been
calling
on my
all
show.
conservatives retards? Does that also make you angry?
And you can answer that question too. But I'm just let's try to pin him down on the Marjorie Taylor Greene thing. Go ahead, Whick.
So I know 𝙎𝙪𝙗𝙚 left. He's been on my show. So obviously that makes me a little angrier because I have a personal relationship with the man, right? Marjorie Taylor Greene is a joke. In a lot is a joke. She's a joke.
She's a joke that got like 80%.
She's
of her
a
vote.
joke
in a
who is
very
this-
small
she's
area.
a joke who
She's
is
been
the-
talked about as a vice presidential
legislation,
candidate.
just real quick, what legislation has Marjorie Taylor Greene authored that has been passed?
Marjorie Taylor
probably
Greene
very,
has
very
been
little.
rumored
Very
to be
little.
considered as a Trump running mate in 2024, man.
But her power extends beyond the ability of authoring legislation. Her vote is very powerful. She does have a vote, and the fact that she's the de facto Speaker of the House, she is Kevin McCarthy's closest ally. So number one, number two. But I take your point on the idea that you have a personal relationship with somebody, and so I guess I am sympathetic to the idea that you would grade a friend like on a higher moral like standard than a stranger.
I reject the fact. I reject the fact that I'm grading on a higher moral standard. I'm not. Right?
Well, you said that. Well, presumably
What makes me
that
angrier, but that's an emotional thing. That isn't a grade on a moral standard, right? Though I think that there were more things that were done. Well, just real quick. One committed more crimes than me, and because there were interpersonal like crimes, if you want to call it. And let's be clear, I'm not like super mad at 𝙎𝙪𝙗𝙚 left. I'm like I'm not like beefing with him now, right? But I thought it was uncalled for. But at the same time, right, with Marjorie Taylor Greene did not break those bonds because those bonds did not exist. Right. So
okay, fair enough. Which
was
one's
more
more dangerous?
There
that was my second
additional
question.
Things that happened, right?
So my second question was, which one is more dangerous? Number one, which one made you mad? You answered that one, or more mad. The second question was, which one's more dangerous?
I think that they are both dangerous in different ways, and let me explain how. Right?
I'll just, you don't even have to. I'll accept it at face value. I'm asking which one is more dangerous.
It's again, they're asymmetrical, but I can't grade them because I don't think that Marjorie Taylor Greene is less dangerous. Let's say that. I don't think she's less dangerous than leftist influencers in general.
Well, yeah. Well,
I would give a considerable amount of money to be as dangerous as Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Well, again, to me that's kind of you kind of like cast your net pretty wide. I guess I'm potentially open to that. Yes. I guess I would certainly be open to that if you aggregated all the influence of every leftist influencer and compared it to one particularly dangerous congresswoman, I think you could.
Well, I'm taking MTG and I'm kind of combining her with the Lauren Bobberts and all that kind of that wing of.
Or you kind of hit it. You're hitting the point that I would argue on the head right now by just kind of using those two names and then hand gesturing vaguely at a bunch of other people. Those are two of the most recognizable Congress people in the United States. They wield a tremendous amount of social power and potential
Once again,
political
what
power.
legislation have they offered that has gotten authorized?
It's not just
passed?
Wick. It's not just about specific pieces of legislation that they have authored. I don't have any of that.
Can you give me?
Also, well, wait a minute. It's
also
also wait a minute.
Stop. So it's not just about that. So give me the specific danger, right? That they have done, that they have the harm that they have specifically caused.
They have further radicalized their base, the Republican Party, Republican leaders like Kevin McCarthy, for example, the Speaker of the House, and also the downstream influence they have on state Republican parties. We see wholesale the ever-increasing number of anti-trans legislation sweeping the nations. Yes, some are getting struck down, others are not. all it does is increase the radicalization. And here's where I'm confused. I want to flip that question back on you. Where's the danger from leftist influencers? They have zero potential for legislation. Marjorie Taylor Greene gets a vote.
Do you not think that leftists, that the
I'm just
left... No, let me ask you, seriously. Do you not think the left has any sway over the Democratic Party at all? You don't think they push Biden to do things that he otherwise would not have done?
I think I think the left does have an influence on the president.
Okay.
I think no, because
Wait,
the very
do you think the
rationale.
left doesn't?
Wait a minute.
Wait, see, this argument is silly. The left has
no
no
silly.
influence over their politicians, while the
it's
right
not silly.
has all this insidious
all or
power
nothing,
over theirs. Like the left is simultaneously
it's not all or
powerless
nothing.
and saintly
It's not
that does
all or
nothing
nothing.
wrong, but the right is this
We are-
all-powerful,
It's
great.
not all or nothing. Believe it or not, it's entirely possible to have that one party can have influence over another party, and another party can have even more influence. Just because the left has some influence on democratic policies doesn't mean that it's equal to the influence that the far right has over the Republican Party. Why do you think some sort of weird cosmic law dictates the two things
I'm
that
asking you
exist in
to
time?
I'm asking you to
case.
prove it. I'm asking you to
hold on.
prove that the far right has more influence than the far left. Please show me something.
Answer the man.
Well, okay. I'm like I'm so shocked right now. So wait a minute. You genuinely think, because I will look into a gazillion examples. We can look up and we can send it to you piecemeal.
And I'll send you one
So
for
wait a minute,
one
wait a
back.
minute. So you think the far left
Yes,
has as
the
much
left.
influence as the Democratic Party as the far right does on the Republican Party?
Yes.
Of course,
Wait,
they
do you
own the
consider-
culture.
Wick, do you consider Trump far right?
He's opportunist. Trump isn't right or left. He's an opportunist.
Hold on.
Hero.
On that point, the left, we all agree the left is the more cultural, powerful force. So, of course, the dominant culture is going to have massive influence over the politics of the left and the center.
Then why
Like
am
the
I still
fact-
paying for health
it's funny,
insurance?
and it's funny you said there's anti-trans legislation. I've looked into some of the anti-trans legislation, like in Texas, and it bans surgeries for minors. So I would say the fact that that's even a norm right now is a evidence of the effect that the left has on
We've got
on
legislation trying to ban trans surgery for adults into
That's
like
too
their
far.
near 30s.
Right,
So
but you're right,
checkmate, buddy. We just check each other, and so hang on, move aside
no,
for that for a minute.
No.
Wait a minute, because
there's a
Daedalus made a
fundamental distinction between legislation that bans trans surgery for adults, which is far right bullshit, and it's wrong, and it should be called out. And anyone who thinks that a 13, 14, or 15-year-old child should have access to surgery is just as extreme on the left. And so legislation that stops that from happening is not anti-trans. And yet everyone who cites there's 40 anti-trans bills, there's 20 anti-trans bills, they're mixing those two up, and that's bullshit.
So hold on. You're saying that if a legislator agrees that like a doctor, a parent, and a 17-year-old should be able to make their own medical decisions about trans healthcare,
Yep.
that is just as far left a position as the position that we should ban even like the use of transgender healthcare at all.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
I'm saying
Okay.
anyone who thinks that it is okay for a 14-year-old child to have their breasts surgically removed is far left.
What about a 17-year-old?
Probably. What about gay conversion? Should a 14-year-old should be allowed to go to gay conversion therapy if they agree to it and their parents agree to it?
So
Probably not.
Probably not.
Hang on a second. We have. I'm just checking real quick. Yeah, there is no floor on the age for breast augmentation, for example. So we offer some gender-affirming surgeries, and that's fine, but not others.
For children? No child should be able to make that decision when they're 14, 15, 16, and 17.
Is a child competent enough to make a decision about a life-saving surgery? Conversely, is a child competent enough to? Conversely, is a child
If a
mentally
child has an
competent enough?
incurable form of cancer, is it reasonable to do experimental surgery because we know the incurable cancer will kill the child? Yes, in that circumstance, which has nothing to do with the increasing
Well,
rates
that's
of
not the
children
example
being
I used.
referred
I don't
to
want to. I don't
gender
want to get
clinics.
stuck. I don't want to get stuck on a
Well,
specific.
but this is,
issue.
but fair enough. But Wick, to your point, this is exactly a piece of evidence that the far left has just as much cultural political power as the far right.
Well,
I think it's
again,
absurd
we've
to
already
say
already stipulated to the fact, or at least Portland has, that the far left has more cultural influence. So again,
Agreed.
this idea that the far left has no or little influence over their politicians, it flabbergasts me, right? We obviously
Same.
have seen over the last 10, 20 years a shift to the left as a nation.
Yes.
Overall,
yes.
right? The
Wick,
fact
us
that
centrists, you
we
and
are
I,
even
we're
having
confused
some of
about
these
this shit.
discussions, and I think it's good. To be clear, I think our shift leftward is good. But again, we have to recognize that this is a form of power. This is a real thing. This is really
Agreed,
an
of course.
issue. It is a
How could anyone
sword we
dispute that?
have.
So I'm curious because I want to revisit this, but obviously PF and Whick say that the far left influences the Democrat, has just as much influence on the Democratic Party, their political proxies, as the far right does on the
Via
Republican, their
culture.
political proxy.
Yep, the
So
fact that
I'm curious.
defunding the police is even an issue on the ballots is evidence that this is true.
And it happened in Minneapolis.
Where did defund the police become a serious piece of the Democratic agenda?
Almost
Hold on, you
every,
know
like
that they
Almost.
made-
talking
Wait a
about,
minute.
like-
Wait a minute.
Hold on.
Who's the leader
Josiah.
of the Democratic Party?
Hold on, Josiah.
It's not Joe
In
Biden.
Port-
That man's a puppet.
In Portland, we have one of the most, one of the biggest cases of like legislation actually being enacted to the effect of like defund the police advocacy. It amounted to about a $17 million cut in the police budget that like took immediately from the divisions responsible for responding to violent crime. It's been pretty disastrous for the city of Portland. It was effective in actively like creating legislative movement here to the effect of about an 8% budget reduction that was then undone during the next legislative
I'll
cycle.
stipulate.
But
I'll stipulate to all that.
Look
I'll
at
stipulate
the
to all
fact that we have gay
wait a minute. Was
marriage
that
now.
wait a minute? Was that Portland or Oregon?
Portland, Oregon.
So it is. So the city of Portland, Oregon.
Yeah,
Okay.
the city
I
of
will
Portland.
stipulate that you can give me some examples of.
Couple really
I think even.
localized
I think yes. Thank you. I will stipulate to that. Bite that bullet easily. So, but again, I'm curious. So Wick's example was defund the police. So Portland, Oregon, and
I
a
can
couple
use
of
other
local-
examples if you don't find that sufficient.
What was Joe Biden's position on defund the police? What was the National Democratic Party?
This is the sleight of hand that do.
No,
well,
of
these
course.
politicians
Wait,
on the
hold on,
left
Wick,
don't
can I
say it, and they
respond?
kind of
No,
poo-poo
Wick,
it.
I
Hold
don't
on.
understand. No, Wick. I
Let
am
me
going to
respond,
hold your heat to
Josiah.
the. I'm,
Let me
I am.
respond,
Wait a minute.
Josiah.
Wait a minute. Let me respond to Wick, and then you can respond to me. Wick,
Okay.
you take umbrage with the fact
fair.
that I recognize distinctions between two things.
But you don't.
Yeah, I do.
No, because you only recognize these distinctions on the left. Let's be clear. You have
Wick,
these blinders towards one side that you simply do not share with the other.
Wick, I would
Wick,
like to
because
make a
I
point
recognize
on your panel.
fundamental distinctions between the two things. You're right now, to use a metaphor, you would look at a shoplifter and an axe murderer and draw no distinction whatsoever and say they're both criminals.
No, what you are doing is you're seeing an axe murderer on the left and you're seeing an axe murderer on your right, and you're saying, well, the axe murderer on the right is the one we should go after.
That's
and
not
you can
true.
ignore the left
very-
axe murderer.
the
That's
very
the
example
analogy
you
we
cited-
should
no,
be using.
You're
here.
just factually wrong, because the very example you cited, I have the leader of the Democratic Party and most Democratic leaders rejecting notions
Josiah,
of defunding the
Josiah,
police.
here's
Wait a
why-
minute, PF. Wait a minute.
Go ahead,
I want to
but I
pin
wanna
down
respond to this.
Wick
Wick,
on this.
please let me
You
respond to
can.
this.
You can. But Wick, that is a fundamental distinction worth noting. I'm sorry if I don't hold Portland, Oregon in one hand and the Democratic Party nationally, led by the President of the United States, on equal playing field. It's insane that you do.
When in
Portland,
2010,
Oregon
in 2010
defunded
who
the
was the leader
police.
of the Democratic Party?
Portland, Oregon
Wick.
defunded
In
the
2010,
police.
just real quick.
Therefore,
In 2010, who was the leader of the Democratic Party?
2010?
Barack
Yeah.
Obama.
Yeah, Barack Obama.
What
It
was
was
his
George
position on
Soros.
gay marriage before he was elected?
I think he was opposed to it.
Yes, and then through the influence of the far left, what was his position during his presidency?
He became open to it.
So
Yeah, he
yes,
supported it.
so the far left influenced him, and I think this was good that they did. It's good that they did. I'm not
That's
saying this
cool.
is bad.
I want to go back
I'm
to
simply
defund the
demonstrating
police.
this.
Can you
This
at
is
least
an
just-
example, a fundamental national example, where it's not localized to a fucking city or a fucking state, but nationally, the whole culture shifted because the far left exerted and exercised influence on its politicians to pull them to a side, and it was successful, and it was good that they did. Hallelujah. Bravo, hooray, we won.
I agree with
right?
this example
But
from
again,
13 years ago that the
but then
president
you
became
act like
more
that this
progressive.
is like a huge amounts of time ago.
I was going with your example of defund the police, and you're screwed on that example. Let's deal with your example that you cited instead of walking back
and forth. This is going back and forth. I would like to interject.
I'm just saying Joe Biden did not support defunding the police. I win. Go ahead.
Josiah, what was Donald Trump's position on gay marriage?
It was already legalized by the time he ran for office.
What was Donald Trump's position on gay marriage?
I don't think he objected to it.
Did Donald Trump hold up pride flags regularly at his rallies? Are there pictures of Donald Trump holding up pride flags?
Yes, I have seen him.
Right.
Yeah.
And Matt Walsh thinks gay marriage should be overturned. So just because the leader of the Republican Party doesn't share the current position of the ideological far right doesn't mean it's a threat worth addressing.
I also said repeatedly. During that example.
Just because Joe Biden doesn't currently hold a position of the ideological far left doesn't mean it's a position that isn't worth addressing.
Number one, it was the example he gave. Number two, I mentioned more than just Joe Biden because it's not like Joe Biden himself was alone.
Now you're backing up. So now you're backing
up.
No,
I even said repeatedly the Democratic Party writ large. I identified Biden specifically, but I also made the case it wasn't the position of Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and other Democratic leaders to defund the police. As a matter of fact, police funding increased under Democratic leadership. So no, that's the difference. You're citing Trump. You're citing Trump as an example, and I will cop to that. I'm saying
because
that
it's the correct position. You will
defund the police was not a notion that was widely endorsed by the Democratic Party.
Here's the more important, broader example. The far left is capable of influencing the people in power, regardless of if the people in power don't happen to share their opinion at the time, which is exactly the reason why, as you stated, it's important to go against people like Matt Walsh, even though Donald Trump doesn't share Matt Walsh's views at this time. So to say, it's not important to go after Matt Walsh because Donald Trump.
I agree. I agree. It is still important to attack.
Is the correct view. Josiah is a centrist, by the way. I've determined this in this conversation.
Absolutely not.
Now is very reasonable and well respected and seems like a nice guy.
You didn't weigh in on this, Fairy Queen. Do you think that the far left influences the Democratic Party as much as the far right influences the Republican Party?
I'm going to give the milk toast answer that nobody wants, which is that I truly don't know. So we're talking a lot. Well, so here's the reason.
This is an entertainment show. Just make up something up.
No, listen.
Don't make something up. No.
Listen. I don't think that it's good. I am having trouble understanding what it is that you mean when you say power, and really what it is that you mean when you say cultural influence.
Power is what our enemies have. Influences, like milk.
Well, I realize this is very nitpicky.
That's a good distinction.
I realize that this is not
power is when they have it. Influence is
but in order to truly know what the answer is, we have to look at the number of legislation. Like, have the Democrats passed more bills as opposed to the Republicans? We would have to look at, like, are there more Republicans in the House of Representatives as opposed to the Democrats? That's not currently true. We know that the Senate is currently controlled by the Republicans. I'm not sure what it is. Well, is it?
The House is controlled by Republicans, Senate by Democrats.
The Senate is just entirely controlled by Democrats.
Irrelevant metric.
Okay, but my point is, what are the metrics that we are using to determine this to be true? Like, I think that we need to, for me, to know whether to really answer the question, I would have to know what the metric is, and I would have to honestly look at it. And I don't know what metric we're using.
What's your intuition?
I don't think that that's relevant. My intuition is garbage. The only thing that matters is what the numbers have to say.
I wouldn't sell yourself that short.
What does the data have to say? Okay. What does the evidence actually show? Does the evidence actually show that to be true?
If it helps, I'm pretty sure there's polling to indicate that attitudes like pro-LGBTQ and like gay marriage attitudes among Republicans have actually decreased.
I wonder why that is. Why do you think that is, Josiah?
Probably because they're bigots.
Well, I think it's
That's one hypothesis. That's one.
I don't have the numbers in front of me. No, just real quick. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think it's this decreased across the board.
Oh, even among Democrats?
I don't have the numbers in front of me though, so I could be incorrect.
No
Check that.
way.
I could be
Pull it up.
incorrect.
Jamie, pull it
No
up.
way. I would
Hold on,
be
Josiah,
shocked. I would be shocked.
You said,
I know among
you
young
said-
people they absolutely have.
Josiah,
right?
you said one hypothesis for why that is because they're bigoted. What is another potential hypothesis for why acceptance of LGBTQ broadly has declined in the last couple of years?
I think that's
Can
the
you
only,
think-
the
can- you
only
can't-
rational hypothesis.
I know.
No.
See, you're
Yeah.
smiling right there. You're joking.
No,
See,
because I know what you. I know
both
what you want me to
you know
say.
exact-
I know what you want me to say,
I
which
know
is
exactly-
them uppity
because
gay
you know
people.
it's
Them uppity
true.
gay people are just pissed off too many people.
Whoa,
No.
gay people.
Yes.
What are you talking about?
LGBTQ. It's part of.
Okay,
It's.
all right.
yeah.
I'm gonna.
No. Let me finish my point. The
Okay.
other hypothesis is that a lot of the extreme ideologies that relates to sex being a social construct, gender and sex no longer being two different things, they're both socially constructed, as per Veronica Ivy proclaiming that on Trevor Noah's show, a mainstream trans activist proclaiming it on one of the most mainstream pieces of television today. That's probably why it says, wait a second, it's kind of weird that there are people saying that a 13-year-old can choose what sex they are and that they should be given hormones and surgery. If that's what LGBTQ is, which of course it's not, because most people, gay, trans, and otherwise, are reasonable and don't believe children should have their breasts cut off. But the fact that there's a small minority that do believe that probably moves the needle back towards less acceptance. That's another hypothesis.
Why do you think that the small minority of people, if your hypothesis is correct, do you think that happens organically, or do you think it's because bad faith Republicans blow those people out of proportion for political benefit? Yeah, now you're smiling. I see you there.
Are
you
you gonna
handsome
let me
SOB.
finish?
I'm sorry.
Are you
go
going to
ahead.
finish? It's,
Yeah,
of
please.
course, a combination of both, but it's primarily an organic development, obviously. That's exactly what the ideology... It's like saying, when the left says, oh, there's Christians who believe that, God hates you-know-what, that represents all of Christianity. It's like, well, there's Democrats that exploit that media for their benefit, but there's also real ideological reasons that people are led to believe that. That's Christian fundamentalism, and it's a real problem. And certainly left-wing fundamentalism is a real problem. And yeah, of course, there'll be opportunists who take advantage of it, but chicken or the egg? If that ideology didn't purport to make those
So
points, there
we
would be
have
no one to
actual
take
numbers
advantage
on the
of it.
Gallup poll, just to fact check here. It has dipped among Democrats from 85% to 79%.
For gay marriage, what
For,
are the exact issues?
Found same-sex relationships acceptable has dipped over the last year from among Republicans from 56% to 41%, which is a larger dip. But it has also dipped among Democrats.
No, I agree.
from
Dips are the same. We don't
to 79.
numbers and
What is,
values are all the same. The
what
fact
is
that
the
there's a
margin
dip
of
is a
error?
dip.
So are we judging power and influence based off of polling data of what, or are we basing it off of what actually gets passed as legislation? Like, what do you mean? Like,
I think we're all over the place. I think it goes back to power manifests in a variety of ways: influence, legislation, executive action, polling, culture, attitudes. I think there are like multiple vectors that power manifests.
So I don't disagree with any of that, but I'm going to return it to what I was saying earlier, which is that at least I truly can't give you an honest answer, right? I could give you my impression and intuitions, but I'm going to do that.
Do you think that has no value?
It would not be honest of me to declare something to be true when I don't know for a fact, right? I'd have to look at it, right? So that's the first thing. But I do want to reclaim the conversation for me, Daedalus, and poor Portland, because I think that we haven't been able to speak quite as much as I've appreciated the back and forth between Josiah and between PF Young. So I would like to return to what I was saying a little bit earlier, right? You three all mentioned, when I mentioned, how are you going to appeal to conservative voters? The response that you gave me, Daedalus, was that we should have a federal holiday, such that people wouldn't have to work, such that it would be easier for people to vote. Portland and Josiah, correct me if I'm wrong, both of you said that we should emphasize mail-in ballots so that people who do not have access to voting could be easier. Is that fair? I'm not misquoting anyone.
And I would say all the above, because I think we would also agree that making like Election Day a federal holiday would be a good idea.
I think to generalize it, it's structurally changing it to make voting more accessible.
Well, and I also said on a cultural and socio-political level, we definitely need to be willing to engage more with Republicans and people on the right side of the spectrum civilly and in productive conversations about
Mhm.
issues that are relevant to our communities, but we can't do that in a way that maintains an air of intellectual dishonesty where we allow equivocation between fundamentally different principles and arguments and actions. So I think we just need to be honest, and we need people who are completely bought into the Trump cult of personality to be, unfortunately, there is a level of not dismissiveness, but just like built-in frustration that's going to come with engaging with anyone who's so bought into that narrative. The narrative that the election was literally stolen in 2020. Trump is going to ride in on a white horse in 2024 and make it all better again. And that's about half of the Republican Party, about 15 to 25 million people, depending on which poll you look at, and it's a pretty significant amount that we still need to be able to engage with, but just in a more honest way.
And I want to be clear. I am
Well said.
I am pro calling that shit out. I think that we should not hold back. Destiny's tweet, right? My response to him was agreeing with him. Because his tweet was that both sides, like the right isn't any better than the left when it comes to empathy. And I agree, right? The right isn't better at this. They aren't doing well. They aren't winning like the hearts and minds and being empathetic. No, they're petty little crooks, right? But the thing is, if we are going to be honest, when we see the same crime happening, even if one may have less localized power, right? We call it out equally. That's all I'm advocating for, is when you see a crime, you say something. When you see someone do something wrong, you call them out for it. And you don't check their skin color, you don't check their check their sexuality, you don't check their political affiliation before you do so. That is it. And I it blows my mind that I'm getting pushback for this. It blows my mind that people
you're definitely not getting pushback on when it comes to like checking immutable characteristics. I think we are all in agreement.
Well, even political, like political affiliation, right? We put so much into when someone sees an R or a D, we make so many assumptions, and I think that's harmful to us, right? Like if you were to look at my voting record and my voting record alone, the D next to my name, always been a D since I was registered to vote when I was 18.
I agree. You've been
right?
a D tonight.
Yeah, I've been a big D. Capital
You've been a centrist, a glorious enlightened centrist, whether or not you admit it.
If you look at my voting record, from Gore on up, right? If you look at my direct ballot initiatives, which I voted on, right? Which I can't recall any off the top of my head, right? But I've always chose the more left-leaning path, right? But to look at only that and then make assumptions that I agree with the left on everything would be wrong. It would be fallacious, right? And I think that like sometimes we do that with the right too. We look at the right and we see that R next to their name. We see they voted for Trump, perhaps. And we make all these assumptions about them. And I think that's wrong. I don't think we can. I don't think we should.
As I said in that, well, I was going to say, like, as somebody who's probably, at least on my team, the most, like, outspokenly, nakedly partisan and unapologetically so, I've even told you, I even said in that conversation with, again, 𝙬𝙤, and 𝕎𝑪, which was the initial predicate to all this, like, I think that conservatives are very often victims of Republican policy, which is one of the reasons I don't hate them. I think that Republican policy is bad, not only for marginalized groups and progressives and Democrats, but also conservatives. The poorest, least educated, most federally dependent, least healthy states in this country, most of them are Republican. Republican policies suck. So in terms of answering Ferry's question as well, and like, how do you appeal to these groups? I think that, as much empathy as you can muster, number one, while also balancing what Portland said with a modicum of intellectual honesty. Like, I can't just make wholesale excuses. I think the election was stolen. Well, maybe it was. No, I'm not going to pretend that it was. Like, not all opinions are valid. I don't have to respect all opinions. I would try to find common ground where we could. And then there's also a component of isolation. The MAGA movement, I think a lot of people would agree. I mean, there are a lot of cult experts, social psychologists, and psychiatrists out there that regard it as an actual cult, okay? The amount of effort that it takes to de-radicalize a cult is extraordinary. You would need like 40, 50, 60 million dedicated people to take on the 10 to 20 million that Portland cited to try to de-radicalize them. We don't have the time, effort, or energy to do that. So what you do is you do a couple of things, in my opinion. You reach out when you can. You try to reach out to the more moderate voters, number two. Number three, you also try to maximize eligible voter turnouts where you can, because this is where Democrats have a huge advantage. If politics were a popularity contest, we wouldn't have a Republican in office because Democratic policies are overwhelmingly more popular. When it comes to the national office, the presidency, the single most high-profile office which gets the most voter turnout, Republicans haven't won a popular vote but one time in the past 30 years. So it's a combination of all these factors, in my opinion. And then as far as the MAGA cult, the 10-20 diehard Trumpers who prefer Trump over their own party, you just wait them out. You elect Democrats, you elect moderate Republicans if that's the only choice you have between them and a MAGA movement. And then you continue to pass legislation and hope over time they de-radicalize. To me, it's like a multi-pronged effort. I've got other questions for Whick, but I'll come back to those because I'm sure other people want to weigh in.
The reason why I wanted to, and thank you very much, Josiah, that is the answer that I was looking for. But I wanted to address, and the reason why I wanted to clarify on what Daedalus and you and what Portland were saying earlier is because while I don't disagree, sure, it would be wonderful for us to have a federal holiday to make it easier for people to go and to vote. And of course, maybe emphasizing mail-in ballots would be something we could do. But when I hear, and this is the English teacher in me, who is the we, right? When you say we, do you mean you yourself as a voter? Do you mean yourself as a content creator? Do you mean yourself as a, like, what does that exactly mean? Let's get rid of the pronouns here. Okay, you as Josiah, you as Daedalus, you as Portland, right? Because I think that, like, while I understand, like, we can talk about politics in two very different ways, the reality is we are all here discussing what we as individuals can do with this tweet that Whick has posted, right? Whick is here with his show. He brings conservatives and liberals onto his show, right? So I don't disagree that it's important to emphasize social movements and policies that we can promote, right? I also think it's important to talk about what you can do, what we can do as individual content creators, right? So when we're responding to, like, Whick's tweet in particular, when he's talking about where we have to stop viewing each other as inhuman, one of the ways I interpreted that is that we as content creators have to stop viewing each other as inhuman, right? So wouldn't an excellent strategy in trying to appeal to some of those moderate Republicans and some of those moderate voters be to perhaps invite a moderate Republican or to invite some of these content creators and to have a civil discourse, to have a conversation with them? We've mentioned Destiny here a few times. I've heard that's his strategy for converting people, isn't it? He brings conservative people onto his show. He has a argument with them. Sometimes they leave ass mad because he embarrasses them. But as a consequence of that, and because he takes them seriously when they come onto his show, he is legitimately able to convert people onto the left, right? So
yeah, this is an excellent point. If you're, I would like to say something, direct a criticism to Whick about a piece of content that he made not too long ago that I think really speaks to these principles that you're kind of talking about. You remember when you had Bryson Gray on not too long ago?
Yes,
very controversial, hyper-conservative religious fundamentalist that doesn't believe gay marriage should be legal, doesn't believe homosexuality
the most extreme
should be
right,
legal.
religious right you can think of.
Yeah. And I think that there can be real value in bringing on people like that if you're really ready to engage with them with a firm hand and treat their ideas with the level of credibility that they have, not necessarily treat them like they are on equal footing with every other guest that you could possibly bring on with any moderate or left-leaning or right-leaning opinion under the sun. I think that when you bring people on that are extreme examples of the far right or far left, and you don't give them the necessary pushback because you want to appear too centristy, too amenable, you actually do a demonstrable harm to your own platform because you alienate people who feel like not represented in their beliefs when they see you allow someone who's
just
so
to be
bigoted
clear, you
and
think
so vile
what I
on your
did?
platform,
You think
and
that's what I
afford
did?
them such a tremendous amount of space and leeway to spew their venom. I think that's really harmful, and I think that in
what is the harm
pursuit of an admirable goal, you can go too far with who you have on and how gently.
Portland, can you hear him talking? Just out of curiosity,
I can't, but I'm
No. I didn't know if Portland might not have heard you because he didn't even hesitate. Can you hear him?
I was trying to finish a point. So
Oh
if
no,
he
no,
was
that's fine. That's fine. No, no,
interjecting,
I just
didn't
wanted.
hear it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
So I will ask you, do you think that's what I did, that I brought him on with no pushback?
Yeah.
I want you to
I
go,
think you were
and I encourage everyone
extremely
else.
gentle
Sure.
with him.
I want you to grow, and I want you to, well, yes, I take umbrage, right? I take issue with the fact that we have to, like, treat even someone who has abhorrent, obscene views, which I believe he has, as the enemy, right? As some demon from hell that we must battle and vanquish on the field. We can't do anything but use a firm hand. That's the word you used.
Yeah, a
firm hand
isn't
to
like dragging them
smash
out
their
and
ideas
killing
and
them,
smash
okay?
them. I think that, and I encourage everyone to go watch that interaction, right? I think that not only I, but Prime Kai, who was there as well, we got out what he believed. We got out him to mask off pretty easily, right? And then, that was the time, in the time allotted, what we had time for. We act as if these are things that are microcosms in time that are separate from everything else. That by doing this, if I don't do everything I have to do, like I should do in the 30 minutes to an hour, which I had that man, right? That I am somehow failing in my duties. And I reject that wholeheartedly. One, I would ask you to point to the harm. Who was radicalized by me having him on? Who was brought to the right, or what was the harm done by me having him on in that instance? I would ask that. And second, I would ask, right, do you not think that there is a value in simply making someone comfortable enough to come back so that I can have further conversations with him on subjects? Because if all I do is insult the man and use that firm hand, if you will, he is unlikely to want to engage with me again, and thus I lose any opportunity to reach out to his audience whatsoever. I think it's a balancing act, and I think that, yes, I vociferously, and I did on the show, right? You can go back, you can check. I vociferously, right, disagree with him. I think it's horrendous and monstrous what his beliefs are, but I can still treat him as a human being, and I think I should. I think that's the right way of going about it. I think that's the best way to reach out.
Yeah, I just fundamentally disagree with you about your perception of like how much you accommodated him versus pushed back on him. I think this is a good example of like a time when I was like, oh man, I love the challenging content with people I disagree with, but this is nauseating to watch. The amount of airtime and the lack of pushback that he got to say such abhorrent things was troubling to me as like someone who's super liberal and
I didn't interrupt him every
approves
second
of having these kinds of challenging
true.
conversations. So I'm just trying to make the point to you that you're harming your own audience and ability to advocate for the causes that you believe in if people who watch your program feel like challenged or alienated by the level of vitriol they're hearing from guests like that.
Why do you assume that pushback needs to happen?
What?
Why do you assume that someone spouting nonsense needs to be pushed back on? Why can't that person be allowed to spout their nonsense and have the audience see it for what it is?
In cases where they're on their own platform, obviously I'm not trying to tell Whick who he can and can't have on, but I'm trying to tell him like what I view as the corrosive effect that it has on the credibility that one has with the left side of your audience when someone so far on the right side is given such latitude on your platform.
Why? You could just as easily say that by Whick allowing Bryson Gray to come on here and spew the, I don't know exactly what his beliefs are, but let's assume that they are as bigoted as you say they are.
Let's be clear, and I want to be clear. Just stop! Right? I want to be clear what those are. He believes that we should actually kill like homosexuals and things like that. They should be stoned.
Oh, okay. So yes, that's fucking degenerate and disgusting and crazy. Are you saying that the more people that hear him say that, the worse off? Or because I would say it's the opposite. The more people that hear him say that, the better off, because then they can go, oh, this guy's crazy. Like, those super religious fundamentalists on college campuses who hold up signs and say all the crazy shit? The more people that see them for what they are...
That's not what he was doing.
No, he said that on my show. That's how I knew, right? That's how I knew that's what he believed, right? Because I'd heard rumors, but I hadn't even said... I had not heard him say it. And again, I gave him the space.
He's pretty open about his fundamentalist religious beliefs on Twitter and stuff. That was where I first encountered them, and I think he's pretty mask off in
the fundamental
wholesale.
point. This is a general principle. If someone has repulsive views, is it not a good thing to let them air those repulsive views to as many people as possible so that people can see them for what they are?
No,
Tell
not
me why not.
necessarily.
You could be right,
Because
but
in case-
I tend to think otherwise.
Because in cases where you do it incorrectly, you don't expose them, you humanize them, and you normalize those beliefs to some percentage of your own audience, or you make your own audience feel like the space is potentially
No one in my
incompatible with
audience
you and your
believes that we
values.
should kill gay people.
I didn't see the
Not a
interview,
single
so
one.
I can't say whether or not. But
I'm
that is
in
a
your
real
audience,
risk.
and
Sure,
I
that's a real
found it
risk.
nauseating to sit through and was reticent to
Good.
return.
I'm glad you did. I'm
You're not
glad that
making the
you
point
found
you
it
think you're
nauseating.
making, dude. You're not making the point you think you're making. I'm sorry. It's just
One of us
like, I'm
ain't.
sorry it escapes you.
One of us ain't.
All good.
Right?
I haven't seen the interview.
I didn't see it either, so I
I'm
can't
with
really-
PF. I'm just going to say, to answer your question, PF, in my opinion,
Yeah.
and Daedalus can go, I think we should all answer your question. I don't think that necessarily, like, just giving a person a platform with no pushback is the best case scenario, because it assumes
I agree
that people with repulsive views could never attract followers. There are people with charisma and certain skills that can air their repulsive views. I mean, history's littered with examples, and do great damage. I think you have to exercise judgment. There are times to platform people. There are times to platform people with pushback. There are times to tease out terrible ideas, views, and do like strategic pushback. There are times to tell a person that they're terrible. Exactly what you just said when Whick explained the views to you, is degenerate and awful and all these things. I do think it's a judgment call, but no, as a general principle, I don't think that, to answer your question, that you should just allow someone with repulsive views the platform and just not push back at all.
I actually agree. One example of that is I'm a former Jordan Peterson fan, because he's gone crazy on Twitter, but his ideas laid out in Maps of Meaning are indisputably phenomenal, and I've yet to hear any even remotely thing approximating decent pushback to it.
That's because you need to slay the dragon that represents the chaos of
The
your
Dragon of
father.
Chaos, yes, don't you know?
Don't you
but
know, eh?
when he talked to Matt Walsh, he did not say shit to Matt Walsh. For Matt Walsh and his buddy, the goon, Michael Knowles, talking about eradicating transgenderism. Jordan Peterson has an entire body of work about the danger of genocidal rhetoric and the danger of using words like eradication and disgust-based metaphors. And he had every opportunity to push back against Michael Knowles, and he didn't. That was a cowardly move on Jordan Peterson's part. Same with Netanyahu. Oh, well, did Israel just make the land better, so now it's okay to do whatever? Agreed. So that's a good point, Josiah.
Can I offer a bond, like a moment of solidarity with you to
please.
cement our new friendship?
Us
apparently,
centrists can
no,
get
you
along all
stop
day.
it. You stop it right there. That's what I'm talking about. This instantly poisons the well. I too
Poisons the well, heals the
am
well.
a former Jordan Peterson fan. This is my
No.
great shame. I am appalled. I'm serious. His Kathy
Whoa.
Newman interview, like,
Oh, yeah.
because I didn't realize like what his political beliefs were, and then over time I feel like he became increasingly radical, and it's my great shame that I actually was a Jordan Peterson fan.
Well, just to be clear, it's shameful that he tweets out Chinese porn and thinking it's CCP propaganda. Agreed, that's shameful. But certainly the ideas laid out in
That's where you
Maps of
first
Meaning-
saw Whick for the first time, right? He was actually in that
maybe in the
photograph. You know
CCC
that?
porn. But the original lectures on JP are, to this day, some of the best content ever created, and I will stand by that. And I guess President Sunday and I have to debate it on Whick's channel at some point, because he seems to think otherwise. But
Gotcha. What about you,
Separate thing.
Daedalus? Were you gonna? It looked like you were gonna say something. Were you gonna also offer an opinion on platforming?
So there is a way to do it, I think, and it's kind of up to the opinion of the content creator. For example, I know nobody watches my show yet. We're very little. Please subscribe. Anyway, I did a show with the other historian I work with the other week where we talked about a 1990s book of right-wing militia nonsense.
Are you a
And
historian?
it was, I am.
Oh, interesting.
It was an interesting show, but I took it and we talked about the book. And we talked about why the conclusions being drawn in the book are not correct, and offered up a counterexample. And it was appropriate because the guy is, I'm pretty sure, dead at this point. But it's how you do the thing and how you present the thing. There was no doubt in anyone who watched the show's mind that this was not something that we supported, that we don't support the concept of having a race war in America. There was no doubt in anyone's mind that we were against that. And like, here's the thing. I love you, Whick. I really do. But I feel like, I feel like we need to sometimes see more concrete demonstrations of your beliefs, because you are too often sitting in the moderator's chair and not often enough debating yourself. It was a lot of fun at least for me, sitting in Sunday's chat and moderating it. A lot of fun having the debate that you, Sunday, and Sirius and Doe and Professor
Sure.
Meat, was unfortunately named, and Lonerbox had. That was a lot of fun, I think. And it was a lot of fun watching you debate.
I just don't like how other people. So it's the same reason I always end up being the DM when I play D&D, because I think everyone else does it wrong. Okay, I don't like other people's moderation, right? And so that I find myself being the one like, okay, well, no one else is going to do this, right? So I have to put it together. I have to set things up. But you will see me debate Tuesday because someone on the left is coming to argue for child pornography. And so we're gonna PTFO that motherfucker. That's what we're gonna do. And I don't care that they're on the left and more left leaning. I am going to be very, very let's say heavy-handed.
Amen, Whick.
Let's say heavy-handed. I won't start with saying, well, you know, I know, right, that you're advocating for child pornography, but Trump is worse right now, and we really should treat you with little kid gloves and things like that. And I'm not going to do that. That's silly. Why would I, right? Now, will I interrupt him every 2 seconds, right, before he even gets his point in? No, I am going to politely and professionally allow him the rope to hang himself. I am going to let him dig his grave. I am not going to interrupt him by doing it. I am going to allow him to do it, and then calmly, without yelling, right, kindly as I can, and I'm going to demonstrate why he is wrong, why he is harmful, and why his ideas are not good. I don't have to perform. I don't have to put on this outrage kind of like art show where I wave my hands and interrupt and mute him to every 2 seconds and things like that. No, I trust my audience enough to know that child pornography is bad.
Whick, why don't you just come out of the closet and declare your centrism right now?
I am not a centrist.
I'm here for you.
I am not a
because
centrist.
If he comes out of the because if he
but
comes
you
out of the
have.
closet, right wingers will come for him. So,
but-
but here's my question, real quick. So this was like a question for like 45 minutes ago, and I can't even remember what it was exactly in response. It was either Fairy Queen or it was Whick talking about reaching across the aisle and charitability and all these things. I can't remember, but it was the example of Merrick Garland, so the Attorney General. So he has taken reportedly great steps to try to disabuse people of the notion that the DOJ is weaponized. I'll give you some examples. So number one, he slow-walked. We have reporting and multiple FBI and DOJ sources. He slow-walked any investigation into Donald Trump related to January 6th, sat on it for over a year, rejected any attempts by anybody to begin prosecution against Donald Trump for over a year. The New York Times did a great expose on this, number one. Number two, the DOJ and NARA, the National Archives, for over a year tried to quietly get documents and things back from Trump over time so as to avoid a legal fight with him. It's another example. The second that Joe Biden's classified documents thing broke, Garland immediately appointed a special counsel, and that's his boss, the sitting president. He pulled the trigger on that much quicker than what he did with Trump, right? Because the idea is, I want to go out of my way to show people that the DOJ is not weaponized, all these things. Now we have a special counsel looking into Hunter Biden, the civilian son of Joe Biden, who has never held a government office.
Except the 𝕵𝖎𝖎 board.
Which is not a government office, but okay. But anyway,
but still just as corrupt.
Hey, I tell you
But
what.
go ahead.
Do you support a special counsel investigating Jared Kushner, who was a government employee?
I support rooting out corruption wherever it rears its
That's
head.
a yes. But anyway, go ahead. So right now, under Merrick Garland, a Democratic appointee, we have Republican special counsels investigating Democrats, right? He is bent over backwards to accommodate him. What has he earned in terms of the goodwill? Does the Republican Party now believe in the institution of the FBI and the DOJ? What has that gotten him, out of curiosity?
So I can answer this question, right? Not the specific incidents, but the general principle, right, of the left being more intellectually honest, and I think it is, right? I think that the left is more serious and intellectually honest overall.
Boo. Boo.
It just is. It just is. At least in.
It just isn't.
Somebody clip that. Somebody clip it.
Okay.
I want
going
it
to
for
I
my
have
D-tier.
never denied this. I've never denied
no.
this. But
You're going
But-
to D-tier, Wick. D-tier enlightened
but-
centrist.
right, what does this earn us? We won the midterms in a historically situation where we should not have. Right, we should not have done as well as we did in the midterms by any historical kind of account. The incumbent president during the first term just gets BTFO'd in the midterms. Just loses
Trump
so many
didn't
more
get
seats.
BTFO'd in the midterms. Like, he gained House seats. Or, I mean, he gained.
What are you
Senate
talking about? In
seats
2018,
No,
they lost so many seats.
Yeah, he gained Senate seats. He lost the House. He gained Senate seats.
Yeah, but again, overwhelmingly,
It's the same.
it's
It's
not
the same thing that happened with Biden.
Oh my god,
basically.
this conflation of the same thing. It's not the
Well,
same
wait,
thing.
well,
Let's
but
look
It
at
is
the numbers,
literally this.
right?
That's literally what
How
happened
many
with Biden
houses?
in
How
the
many house seats did he lose?
I'm gonna.
How many
I'm
house
sorry?
seats did he lose? How many house seats did the Trump lose in 2018?
I don't know exactly. He won Senate. He gained Senate seats.
How
That's
many?
the point.
How
That
many?
Biden lost House seats and gained Senate seats. Trump lost
But
House seats and
see,
gained
like
Senate.
if Biden loses one Senate seat and if Biden gains one Senate seat and loses 3 House seats, right? Is that better or worse than if Trump loses one Senate seat but also lost 50 House seats, right?
He
I'll
didn't
lo-
lose
I'll
a
allow
Are
him
they
to
the
offer a
same?
few
Are these the same thing?
Dude, just Google the results of the two
Yes,
midterms.
do
You're
it.
like fundamentally confused about the reality.
Do it.
I'm
Do it.
sorry.
So
you don't
This is
remember
math.
it well enough.
This is math. You can look at the
But
yeah,
numbers
it's
here.
math that it basically played out the
Oh my
same
god,
way.
I
for
have to
Trump
do
that
this.
it
I
did for
hate
Biden.
this. I hate that I have to do this, but
And-
I'm going to
and while
fact
you-
check you.
and-
But
Jamie,
while
pull
you're
it
doing
up.
that-
And while you're doing it, I was just going to say, I don't know what this has to do with the special counsel stuff because most of this happened after the midterms later on this year.
But do you
So-
think that this is a new phenomenon that the left just became intellectually honest in the last 2 years? No. This is something they've demonstrated for the last 10 years.
Wick, why are you painting with such a broad brush?
well,
What do you mean the left
Wait,
is
what?
more intellectually honest?
Democrats, to be clear.
What does that mean?
Well, I don't see. Well, hang on, wait. So I don't know if I accept that, Wick, because let's say, I mean, I do accept obviously that the left, generally speaking, Democrats, generally speaking, are more intellectually honest. But that aside, I'm not seeing where that material like it manifests. Like, so Trump did get elected. There was a time when he had the trifecta. We have a Supreme Court regressive conservative supermajority. 30 out of 50 state legislatures are controlled by the right. We have to increasingly overperform in the electoral college with each subsequent election. The right in this country has enormous systemic advantages with respect to politics, colossal advantages. But I guess what I'm saying is, I don't even think that that Garland is being intellectually honest, because as many people point out, if Garland was being intellectually honest, it would be perfectly fair to say, no, I'm not going to slow walk an investigation into Trump. If the merits are there, fuck the perception of it. You just follow the facts without fear or favor. That's his expression. I don't. If Garland is being intellectually honest, he shouldn't have to appoint Republicans to investigate Democrats. When was the last time we had a Democrat appoint a Democrat to investigate a Republican? It's always this double standard, and I just don't see where it benefits us at all. And even in the 2022 midterms, it was hilarious in that it wasn't the red wave, but they still won back the House. It was still some slight victory, nothing compared to what it could have been. But now they control.
We act
one
as if that doesn't matter, right? The like as we
Oh
can
no,
see
it does.
with the Senate.
I just want to own it. I just want to own it.
Just real quick, as we can see with the Senate, right, and the troubles that the Democrats have, if we had a bigger ratio in the Senate, we would get more done. And much like in the House, if the Republicans had a bigger ratio than they do, if we had lost by more, that absolutely would. There would be downstream effects of that in legislation, and it absolutely matters.
I'll own it. I just want to clarify. I agree with you that a red wave materializing in 2022 would have been considerably worse than what happened.
And again, my argument is that why that did not occur and why Trump lost in 2020 as well was because the Democrats behaved better and they were rewarded for it. Do you disagree?
Kinda, because
What?
Trump's loss in 2020 is actually quite remarkable in certain respects, because yes, He lost by 7 million popular votes, but Trump is always going to be less popular head-to-head than the Democratic candidate. He was less popular than Hillary Clinton. He was less popular than Joe Biden. That's not what wins elections. He ultimately lost, despite presiding over COVID and all the economic fallout, by like a 40,000 vote margin. And that was also with his voters not availing themselves of the COVID era accommodations to because he was like, mail-in voting sucks, don't do it, or mail-in voting sucks, don't do it, and they didn't. So there is a timeline where right now Donald Trump is still president despite all of the things that he had, just his stupidity, his incompetence, his record, all the things working against him. So no, I mean, like, in certain respects, it's really cool that, hey, there are a lot more people who like Democratic policies and politicians than Republican policies and politicians. But that's not ultimately what wins again. Going back to what 𝙠𝙚𝙗 said earlier about gerrymandering. My God, Republicans gerrymander in ways I wish Democrats did. I wish Democrats gerrymandered the way that Republicans do, because they know how to play the game to win. They know they're not popular. They know.
Again, this idea, right? I think this is, you're losing me here, because again, I think that, like, we are assuming that if the slate was fair, that the Republicans would go away, and I don't think that's true.
No, I don't think they'd go away. No, to be clear, I don't think they'd go away. I just think they would be in power less often than not.
Is there anything?
Or they'd have to implement better policies to win votes that were necessary to actually maintain political power, which would be a huge fucking win, frankly.
The systemic stacking on our election is really what allows Republicans to continue to be the Republicans.
Is there anything that the Democrats, like, morally, and just like, not just, oh, they're worse at playing the game, but like they actually do? Is there anything the Democrats do worse than the Republicans in terms of like morals or values or ideals?
Or
no, for 𝙎𝙬𝙗, just
okay,
anything.
Collectively, no. I'm sure you could cite me like individual actions that I would probably condemn, but no,
That's
collectively.
so crazy to me. That's so crazy to me.
Yeah.
It's an intuition. You had said earlier that what is it? The MAGA Republicans you regard as a cult or something like that?
Mm-hmm.
How many people was that? This was a while ago that we were going to get into this.
I think Portland pegged them at like 15 to 20 million. I don't have the numbers.
There was 70 million people that voted for Trump, I believe.
Yeah, and if you look at the polling data, the amount of people that are like registered Republicans, that usually makes up about 30 to 32% of the overall voter base. Those are the people that, when polled, about 55% of them believe that Trump is still the best candidate for 2024. I think somewhere between 55 and 70% of them believe the election was literally stolen, depending on which poll you look at.
Well, hold on. The claim Trump is the best candidate for 2024, I mean, like, I could agree with that solely from the lens of who is more likely to win, DeSantis or Trump. That doesn't mean I like Trump.
If you are willing to vote for Trump following the events of the 2020 election cycle and his attempt to actually upturn our democracy and install himself as an illegitimate president, I think that you have conceded enough ground on like the political and moral level that I'm assuming you're
retarded,
bought in completely to the ideology.
I don't know enough about it, but I don't think Trump tried to lead an insurrection.
I watched it happen.
It was on TV. Who do you think tried
give
to
us the
lead the
centrist
insurrection?
perspective, Whick.
No, I disagree with him. I think it was clear. And I think that we were seeing this in the indictments that are coming out.
Hillary Clinton,
just real quick, I think the indictments that are coming out has shown very clearly that there was criminal wrongdoing. And while yes, we got to wait to see it's proven in court, right? I think that there's enough there to make me pretty confident that yeah, he's a crook and criminals should be punished.
If that is what Whick believes, I'm more inclined to believe it because Whick is the most reasonable person here besides myself. But I'm genuinely, I don't follow these play-by-play politics.
PF can't see the three of us, guys. We're lost in his feed. We're lost in his feed.
I don't follow.
I think this is power. This is stop real quick. I think this is a powerful example of the influence that I can wield that you cannot, because you are seen as a shill. And I am seen as fair and reasonable. So I think the reason I am seeing that is because I am more than willing to criticize the left just as much as I would criticize the right. That gives me a power that you do not have.
True. Let's take this moment. You guys can genuinely educate me. Okay. I've obviously we saw January 6th, but then is the argument that Trump's goal was to literally round up the politicians and install a puppet government like like a
His
military
goal was
junta?
to compel Mike Pence to use an alternate set of electors to maintain his position as president.
Is that what's
which
is that what has been coming out in the indictments?
that is what
yes.
is
Oh,
that is
okay, I
what's
don't
been
know that. I didn't know
repeatedly
that.
alleged by
Yeah.
Mike Pence himself
There's quite a few things
corroborated
in addition
extensively.
as well, right?
Yeah,
And
and
this kinda
as a matter
speaks
of
to-
fact,
The
Wait,
Georgia,
what is
This kinda
the
the
speaks to my
Georgia
point.
one
Like, you
drop.
can-
Hold on, and I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm
Oh.
just genuinely curious. What is because I'll look it up because I'm interested to actually know what's going on. What is the evidence that you just cited for Trump was literally going to tell Mike?
You gotta look at the
Pence told us.
indictments,
Mike
right?
Pence told us.
We don't have
He refused to
the
do it.
no stop.
Wait, 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 wait,
Stop,
whoa, whoa.
please, because I don't want. This is like I'm willing to have this discussion, but I'm going to set aside
It's a
4
pretty-
or
yeah.
5 hours to talk
Yeah,
about this
Well,
because
just give it 10. Can we just get 5-10 minutes? I just want the 5-10 minute overview. That's it. I promise.
There are
Josiah,
91
you're probably
indictments. We don't
actually
have-
more
I'm
educated.
I'm not
on
pushing
this.
back other
Sure,
than
sure.
asking genuine questions.
Josiah, can you give us?
Sure.
I think Josiah's probably the most equipped because he argued this recently, right? To give us the TLDR, so concise as you can. Give us the
Yeah.
evidence to indict Trump. Go ahead.
Yeah, so it is Mike Pence's own words. He's mentioned them in interviews. He's conducted interviews where he's relayed the words. Biographers have written who have interviewed Mike Pence during the 2020 and 2021 election cycle, and the citations are in like an easy, digestible form in the indictments themselves by Jack Smith. So like that, it's like really spelled out, like super. It's a narrative indictment, so it's written in a way for laymen such as us to all read if you're not a legal scholar. So I would definitely check that out.
Are we just going off Pence's words? Because
No, the evidence is incredible, and
Well, hold
there
on.
is corroborating statements from a bunch of different people. There's evidence to back up the entire chain of communication. There's like lawyers that were working directly with Trump who are publicly citing the legal precedent for Mike Pence to be able to do this. It is like so demonstrably and clearly correct that anyone who is still willing to back Trump politically, vote for him, turn a blind eye to that, is someone that you are going to have a really, really hard time engaging with intellectually, because they clearly haven't even done the first bit of research on
here
the
I am.
near insurrection that the country experienced in
Here I
January
am.
2021.
Genuinely asking questions, and your first
Yeah.
instinct is anyone who disagrees with me right off the bat is an idiot. Well, like, hold on, that's not going to convince me. I'm genuinely because, like, for example,
That's not what I'm saying. That's not
well,
what I'm saying.
That's
You-
what
you
I
did
took from
say
that.
that.
That's how I felt.
Let me try to explain that
The
what I'm
evidence.
saying
I'm
is if
concerned
you
about the
haven't
evidence at this
done
point.
if you're still willing to vote for him because you haven't done any level of looking into the charges or the reality of the situation, I have a really, really, just as a casual person on the internet, have like no chance of
Why don't
unpacking
you just
all
give him
of
the evidence, man? Like,
What?
why don't you just why instead of saying if you haven't looked at this yourself, if you haven't educated yourself, you're
No, here would be
stupid.
my-
Which,
let-
you
let
have
me- let
interrupted
me-
me every time I fucking talk.
This is.
Man.
I just
I'm
want. I
sorry,
just want
but
5
it's
minutes
really
here to expand this
frustrating.
because prior to this panel, I would have gladly said as someone who voted for Biden last election, between Biden and Trump, I'd absolutely go for Trump today.
Yes,
But this might change things if there's like clear evidence that because my conception of what happened on January 6th is a bunch of fucking Looney Tunes went into the Capitol, and Trump said, you know, he like kind of riled it up, but he also said like peacefully and blah blah blah, and then he did eventually concede the election in his own goofy kind of way. But
No, he's never conceded the election.
well, Joe Biden
He
is the
hasn't-
president, and he's been the president
Yeah,
for the
but
last 3
Trump
years.
has never to this day
Well,
conceded
hold on.
the election.
Look, sir, I'm not arguing with you. I'm telling you what I believe up until this point, and I'm opening myself up to
Okay,
change in
fine.
the face of new evidence. That was my conception of it. So if there is evidence that no, hold on. On January 6th, Trump's plan was to install a puppet government, and there's evidence of the entire scheme and all of the plan, like Valkyrie with Stauffenberg taking out Hitler and then implementing their whole. If there was a plan like that in place, that would that would change my mind significantly. But I'd like to hear
that is a very big reduction. There are parts of that which are accurate. He did want to install loyalists in crucial positions of power to effectuate his agenda. There was discussion about employing the Insurrection Act to deploy the military against anyone who would resist.
Do we have
Pence.
Trump saying that?
We do not have Trump saying that, as far as I'm aware.
We have people who are
we
now
have
his
we have
political
members.
enemies.
No, we
saying
have
that.
people
No,
who
we
are
have his
still his
lawyers.
allies. Yeah, John Eastman and
We also
and,
we also have Mark Milley, General Milley, who
the chairman of the
spoke on
Joint
it.
Chiefs of Staff.
Who
Yeah,
spoke on it There's an
Rudy
article
Giuliani,
I
who
love.
was his personal attorney at the
Yeah.
time, Sidney Powell.
What did
who
Rudy
was
Giuliani
also
say? Hold on, specifically Rudy
his
Giuliani.
personal
What exactly
attorneys.
did Rudy Giuliani say that Trump said about installing a puppet government?
Rudy Giuliani is one of the people who said that Mike Pence was constitutionally able to to choose an alternate set of electors in
Is that
the
true?
process of.
No,
Yes.
it's not.
No,
No, it's not. Well, no.
that he can. No, it's
Yeah.
not true that he can do it. It's true that Rudy Giuliani and other legal experts close to Trump and officials working for him publicly said
as a
this is
matter
what
of
Mike
fact-
Pence needs to do.
As a matter of fact, just a fun piece of trivia. The lawyer who proffered this scheme that the vice president can just unilaterally throw out ballots he doesn't like and count ones he does like was asked by Trump's White House counsel. The question was basically, dude, you're insane. Let me ask you something. If that's true, could Al Gore, the Democratic vice president in 2000, have done it to President Bush? And John Eastman, the attorney, said, no, he couldn't have done that, even though basically
Well, certainly Trump was on the phone. We have voice recording of Trump on the phone with Governor Kemp saying, find me 11,000 votes, right? That's pretty harsh evidence right there.
Yeah.
We also have members
as-
of the Oath Keepers and stuff that were charged with seditious conspiracy and have been convicted.
Well,
People
you can
who
be charged with anything. But my point is,
convicted. They've been
Convicted.
convicted of seditious conspiracy in relation to the events of January 6th. This is what I mean about.
Is there any even remote? Let me ask you this: what is the steelman of? What is the most charitable interpretation of the pro-Trump response to what you're saying? Do you have any idea what an intelligent pro-Trump person would respond to?
Real talk, and I'm not exaggerating. This is the only explanation that I could accept as strongest.
I believe
is an insanity plea. That he literally, despite all the evidence, thought.
I would like to offer a better steelman.
Okay.
The common steelman that you also heard a lot in relation to the 2016 Russiagate investigations and stuff is that Trump himself was not directly involved with or and did not direct anything.
Conspiracy bullshit thing. We all agree on that, right?
There
not
were
a single
convictions.
person
there were convictions. There were
see,
charges.
now I'm doubting everything you're saying because I know for a fact. Let me make my point. I know for a fact that there's not a single person in the entire Trump campaign was convicted of collusion with Russia. Paul Manafort.
Collusion's not a crime.
Right,
there's no criminal charge for collusion.
Right. So not a single person. So let me rephrase it.
So I'm going to need you to read.
But not a single person, as a result of Mueller's investigation into Russiagate, which is of course a conspiracy bullshit delusion, not a single person in Trump's entire administration was convicted of anything approximating conspiracy to work with Russia to overturn the election. Paul Manafort was convicted on corruption charges. Cool. Not a single.
Okay. Do you know what do you know about Roger Stone's charges?
Hold on. Let me be.
PF. What do you know about Roger Stone's charges?
He worked with 𝙎𝙪𝙗𝙬𝙬 2.0.
Sorry.
That was the account. 𝙎𝙪 was the account. I don't know if Stone was the one who worked with it, but 𝙎𝙪 was the account.
I believe it was Roger Stone with 𝙎𝙪. Right. Yeah.
I'll take your word for it.
Right. Someone said we have dirt on Hillary Clinton, and Roger Stone was like, "Well, tell me about it." That was the extent of the collusion with Russia. So hold on. Let me just say this in real time. The fact that you so confidently just said Russiagate was not a conspiracy, even though now I know for a fact it was a conspiracy, now I don't trust anything you say.
This is exactly what I'm talking about. You're fucking pointless to talk to because you literally don't know the fundamental facts of any case you're talking about. You know a few things you've heard on the radio or on Fox News or whatever, and you say them so confidently that you dismiss even
then correct
listening
me if I'm wrong. Name one person.
I've corrected you when you're wrong so many times. You just interrupt. You run your mouth. I'm just done with it. Fuck it. Whick, can I go?
Please do. Name one person in Mueller's investigation who is convicted of anything approximating conspiracy with the Russian government. Name one.
It's not about the specific charges people were convicted for having contact with Russian officials.
Name one.
Well, can I just ask
one? Okay, stop, drop before.
Fucking simpleton, dude. I'm not going to humor you anymore. If you want me to spoon feed basic information to you, Google it. I'm not explain like I'm five, okay? I'm not your personal fucking attendant for information. You're too dumb for me to explain it like you're three. You're a fucking idiot.
It is 8 p.m.
That could be true.
It is 8 p.m.
It is true. You have demonstrated the entire time that we've been here that you have an IQ lower than the room temperature. It's fucking
True.
painful to sit through a conversation with you.
And I've taken
You are
IQ
the
tests,
reason
and
that
I
we
can
can't
confirm
have these
that.
conversations.
That's true.
Oh, well,
And
I just see right there. Now I know everything else that you've said is untrue, even though there's 1,000 different fucking sources I could use to verify everything you just said. I know it's untrue because one thing you took fucking you're a fucking hopeless case, dude.
Agreed.
You're a fucking moron.
You sound like my mother.
Yeah, I'm sure your mom's probably very disappointed in you.
Actually,
What? This has been wonderful. But I want to give, if you want it, like, I want to give people an out if they want to escape this madness. You don't have to. I still want to talk, right? But I do want to respect people's time. I did say 6 to 8. So
yes, I think I do have to run soon. But like, if 𝙎𝙪𝙗𝙧𝙚, I genuinely, Portland, it's been fun. Obviously, we're just going back and forth. This is all, we don't really, this is fun. We enjoy it. We don't actually dislike each other. But if 𝙎𝙧𝙧 actually has, and I'll obviously being kind of chippy here, but like, for real, Russiagate, and I'm honestly open to this, but correct me if I'm wrong, not a single person was convicted for anything approximating conspiracy with Russia. Am I wrong?
I don't know of anyone who was charged or convicted of conspiracy. The only thing I will append to that is I don't think that charge has to be brought and a conviction has to be brought for Russiagate to not be a conspiracy. That's probably where we disagree.
Yeah,
so I would just
there are
go ahead.
clear examples of contacts between the Trump campaign and
Sure.
Russian agents.
That's not right, but that's not illegal.
It is.
Yes,
That's
it
why
is.
they were charged and convicted.
We expelled the Russian agents for espionage.
Okay, I can't have a conversation with 3 people. So 𝙎𝙧𝙧, because you've proven yourself the most reasonable person here.
That's right, Whick, and you're here too. I am more reasonable than Whick. no backsies. No backsies. Fairy Queen, Whick.
But hold on.
I'm just saying. I'm just kidding.
What did you said earlier? You said you don't think the conviction of conspiracy needs to be put in place to say that Russiagate was not a complete delusion. So expand on that.
Well, I think the case. So I would have to go back and revisit exactly like the Mueller report because it's like 2 massive volumes.
Which admittedly I've never read. I'm hearing this secondhand. That's why I'm asking someone who would more likely be able to dispute that.
So to me, there's a world between nothing of impropriety and dark backroom calculating people conspiracy, right? There is a vast chasm, and Whick will appreciate this because there's room for centrism between these two things.
Look at it. It all comes back to enlightenment. But go ahead.
I would just say it's closer to conspiracy than to nothing. So we'll quibble over that. I think that the fact that there are these 2 poles, and as Daedalus pointed out, there was strong evidence and convictions that were brought of the wildly inappropriate and in some cases illegal contacts between Russian assets and the Trump campaign and Trump administration, even if Trump himself did not direct it. I do think that's a distinction worth making. So to your point, when people say that, Trump, he schemed with Putin to get in power, obviously the evidence does not support that. And
𝙎𝙧𝙧, that was my whole point. Not to interrupt you, that was the whole point that I was trying to make when you interjected.
You failed utterly. It was so poor.
You interjected very aggressively to say a bunch of wrong stuff again. Okay. What I was trying to make the point of was that
IQ over and over again.
Stop,
but hold on.
Stop.
It was once, but it was...
Stop. Oh my God. I will mute the fuck out of all of you. Finish your point, Portland, and then I'm going to go to closing statements. That's what we're going to do. That's all we're going to do. And we can have these closing statements, and then if anyone wants to stay, they may. If they have to go, I understand.
I want to yell at you some more.
I get it. Portland, go.
What I was trying to say was that the steel man of the Trump defense is that he had no firsthand involvement or knowledge, which is also the steel man defense you would make for the charges brought against his administration and officials working for him in contact with Russia, with the Russian government and powers that we know were involved in an information campaign where they were actively trying to influence. Oh, we lost 𝙎𝙧𝙧. we know that the Russians were like actively carrying out a cyber campaign to influence the outcome of the election. It's like very, very debatable to what degree, if any, the Trump administration or Trump himself was like directly involved. The Steel Man is like, no, he wasn't directly involved with anything coordinating with Mike Pence. I mean, with the Oath Keepers and with the other people that were involved in the January 6th plot. That he is personally, his hands are totally clean. Everyone around him are the ones that are guilty of wrongdoing. I find that to be a very lackluster argument, but I think it's the best defense that one could offer for Trump, is that he's not directly the agent involved or making the plans and executing them.
Okay.
I got clicked.
With that said,
sorry about that.
With that's fine. With that said, we have gone to routes that I did not expect, on rabbit holes that I did not expect. I will say that I will give my closing statements last, but I want to start with Daedalus and then work our way around. And so Daedalus, closing thoughts. Why am I guilty? Or if you're on Whick's side, why am I innocent? And we'll go with that. Go ahead.
Actually, I'd like to hear why Whick is guilty from everyone. That would be much better.
Fair enough.
I'm going to stick and hold to that people who have more institutional power should be held to higher standards. That's all. That was my chief contention the night of. Remains my chief contention today. I love you, Whick. I am probably your fiercest defender in my subset of the community, much to their chagrin. But that's where I got to leave it.
Thank you.
Is Whick hated by the historian community?
Yes.
The President Sunday community specifically. He is not a.
Wait, is President Sunday the other historian you were referencing, Daedalus?
No,
he's the president.
I was going to say,
obviously
Mr.
the president of Canada.
Mr. President can't be the historian as well.
But I wanted Fairy Queen to go next. So Fairy Queen, innocent, guilty, in between. What's your thoughts here?
I think that you are innocent, but I will give my reasoning here. So the reason why I'm on this side of the panel, even though I largely agree with most of the points that the opposition has presented tonight, I agree you should call a spade, but I would say that it's a mark of respect for your opposition to call a spade and to be bluntly honest. But I also think that there's a difference between being bluntly honest and degrading your opponent. And the problem with degrading somebody unfairly like Matt Walsh or like Michael Knowles is, even if they are idiots, the thousands of people that follow them are not necessarily. When you have to, if we care about actually removing these people from their positions of institutional power, if we care about getting more people to vote blue, then you have to be able to appeal to those Republican moderate voters. You have to be able to get into the mindset of what it would be like to be a mom who sincerely does believe everything that Matt Walsh or Michael Knowles says about transgender issues. And that's the reason why I have to be on this side of the issue. I think that political polarization is something that we have great reason to be concerned about. This is a study that not a study, but it's an article that I pulled up. It's by the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. The title of it, you guys can all look it up. It's called "What Happens When Democracies Become Perniciously Polarized." If you scroll all the way down, and you'll see what happens in polarization and democratic decline. 3 of the countries listed, they backslid from liberal democracies to electoral democracies. About 13 or 14 of them backslid from liberal or electoral democracies to electoral autocracies. And I think about roughly 7, they backslid from liberal or electoral democracies to closed autocracies. So if you care about uplifting and maintaining democracy, you should care about being able to appeal to the opposition. And you can be blunt and you can be honest in doing so, but you have to also be able to appeal to what it is that they care about. And you have to be, and I don't think that calling them idiots and slamming the man with the guitar as a pedophile is the way to achieve that.
Hey, thank you for being here.
I'm laughing too, buddy, because I see what's over your shoulder. I see that.
Oh yeah. I just FYI, I am not a pedophile.
Different man with the guitar. It's let's be clear. It's the Richmond, north of Richmond guy. Okay, beard. He has a beard.
Sorry. That's my bad.
Yep.
Richmond,
𝙠𝙚. Guilty, innocent? What do you think?
Guilty, of course. My God, man. No, listen, Whick. Again, I'll echo. I actually enjoy these conversations. I enjoy the ongoing perpetual tension because I don't think, and I think Mr. Pibb would concede to this, I think 𝙠𝙚𝙗 would concede to this, there is no perfect zone. This is a constant push-pull tension on a tightrope, and it's just minute by minute by minute, a series of judgment calls. By my judgment, I just think that in your efforts to be charitable, you aid and abet the worst side. And I think that's a problem. I'll actually link you all to, since we're exchanging links, a really good article in the Bulwark, which points out exactly what I'm talking about. There's so much, even among the so-called liberal media, into outreach to Trump supporters and to Republicans and conservatives, and the left just doesn't understand the right and the. But there's never that opposite. There's no Fox News op-ed talking about what do MAGA supporters not understand about progressives? Why what's going on there? There's always this asymmetry of expectation, and I think it is profoundly, number one, irrational. If there is supposed to be a double standard, I think you need to move heaven and earth to justify it, and I don't think anybody has, number one. Number two, it's dangerous. I think that grading the worst of the two political parties on a curve will only aid and abet it, okay? I agree with Fairy Queen that demonizing the opposition when you're trying to reach out to them is a bad idea. And again, believe it or not, as hyper partisan as I am, the most people in my life are conservative, and if they are voters, they are voting Republican. I don't hate them. But I also think that there are times and a place where you just cannot give an inch, where it's like, no, this is dangerous. I can't pretend that it's not. And I can't say that this minor thing or relatively minor thing on the left is equally bad. Even if I say it is bad, I have to be able to recognize the distinction between $1.25, a carjacker, and an axe murderer. And I would just also say too that, I think that we've been all over the place. And I think part of that is, we have to be able to talk about these subtopics individually more, because there's just so much packed into here. We were Trump and Merrick Garland and Russiagate and just all the things, because this manifests in so many different ways. And I would lastly conclude that I do think power, formal power and informal power and responsibility scale. So be it a cultural influencer with no legislative power or the president of the United States, I think power and responsibility scale.
Thank you for being here, and
absolutely, buddy.
Continue. Next up, Portland.
Thanks for having me. This was truly, truly painful, but I hope people enjoyed it. No hard feelings, PF. I sincerely hope that you look into the Trump indictments, the scale, and extreme amount of evidence hopefully will be enough to dissuade you from voting for him in 2024, as you suggested was a possibility earlier. I'm going to take you at your word that you're serious about that, and I think if you do look into it seriously, you'll find compelling reason to reconsider your vote. That would be a huge win in and of itself, and honestly, the best thing that could possibly come from this panel is even one person making a more informed political decision as a result of it. So that is a nice takeaway, good silver lining. I appreciate you guys having me on. I enjoyed interacting with all of you. Fairy Queen, I thought you brought some really interesting points to the table and agreed with the prosecution on almost everything, which was really refreshing because we were right. Whick, I look forward to seeing you treat a pro-child porn advocate much more kindly than you did any of us tonight. You really screamed and flailed and did all those hand gestures and stuff that you kind of jokingly said you wouldn't do with the pro-cheese pizza guy earlier. And I don't know if you realize that you've basically been doing that with us all night. So I enjoyed it. Hope your heart rates come down by now. And you can follow me on Portland is Burning on Twitch and Twitter if you guys want, or X. Fuck. Thanks.
And OnlyFans too, right?
You can follow me on OnlyFans.
Fair enough.
You.
I'll tell you what else I'm not gonna do, right? That I'll do with you that I won't do with the cheese pizza guy, is I'll still have you on and talk to you and invite you on panels. This is probably this guy's only shot, right? I'm gonna give him his shot, right? And we'll see what he's got. PF Young, go ahead.
Yes. First off, I just noticed the title of your stream is called Soy Beta Leftist Council. Now, obviously, some of you fit that description. I resent being included on the Soy Beta Leftist Council.
You're my Johnny Cochran. You're my defense. Okay, you're not on the council.
You're not on the council.
You're
You're
the
not.
Okay, good.
defender.
I was going to say,
Yeah.
how can you be on the council without being a master?
Was that a Star Wars thing? Did you just Star Wars?
Second, I would like to say this conversation, to me, truly, especially at the end, Portland, I appreciate what you said about, it would be a win if I were to look into the evidence and the evidence said what it says that you say it does, and my opinion would be changed. I totally agree. And to me, that is the spirit of enlightened centrism. I know, certainly juxtaposed to everyone here, I seem like I'm the pro-right-wing person. I have, for example, actually my favorite videos of mine are the ones criticizing Matt Walsh for being a religious fundamentalist twerp. And so I think next time we could use some, bring on some actual MAGA cultists and, heighten the juxtaposition. I think the enlightened centrism will manifest itself much more clearly. But I do appreciate it. Whick, as always. Other than your thing about the left is more intellectual honest, I'll put you at C tier on enlightened centrist. That's pretty good.
Wait for it. I think I can win you over on this. But
Oh, here we go.
Okay, well,
I'll let you finish your thing. I'll let you finish.
Yeah, I'll just say yes. Thanks, guys. 𝙎𝙬, I appreciate it. I'd be curious to discuss this topic further too, on the topic of centrism and the Trump stuff, because you, and I mean this truly, have more information on the topic than I do, and my questions, despite being couched in classic P.F. Jungian charisma and chip, are genuine. Like the Russiagate stuff, like this is my understanding of things, and if it's not the case that what I'm saying is correct, I would like to know that. And I am an idiot, truly, so I have no problem changing my mind because I know I'm dumb, and so I know I believe things that are incorrect. But otherwise, Whick, as always, thank you very much.
Thank you. When it comes to what I am and who I am and what I do, I have some very core beliefs that there should be equity and fairness. Equality is paramount. Equality of opportunity. I want to judge people based on their merit and what they do. I want to judge actions based on either the harm or the good it has caused and the intent behind it. When I look and I see one side being held to account by people who I think are reasonable, rational, intelligent people, and then those same reasonable, rational, intelligent people, when someone else does the same thing that happens to have a much lower follower count or simply not be in a position that the first gentleman was or first lady was, it rubs me the wrong way. It rubs me the wrong way. It smacks of hypocrisy. It smacks of blindness. It smacks of rules for thee and not for me. And I think that is fundamentally what is driving the distrust on both sides, because the right does this too. The right does this as well. They have these blinders on when it comes to them. And if I was on the right, I would be talking to them more than I do. The reason that you perhaps see me criticize the left more is because there are more leftists in this space. There are more leftists on my stream. There are more leftists in my audience. So obviously I'm going to interact with them more than I am with the right wing. And so I am going to criticize them more simply by dint of there being more of them. It's a per capita thing. And I encourage you to not withhold judgment simply because someone is on your team or on your side. When it comes to having influence and power, I think that it is very clear the cultural left wields influence and power that we should just admit to. There is a fundamental distrust of our institutions and of the government in general, largely because everyone is pretending that the truth does not exist. We are covering our eyes and pretending that one side is all evil and the other side is saintly, or there is this huge imbalance. Now, when I say I want to call it out when it happens, obviously, I believe, and I think I could justify and demonstrate that the right is guilty more often than the left. And therefore, we will, using my method, call out the right more than we will call out the left, because there is instances of this happening more on the right than there are on the left. But if that changes, if it ever switches, then we need to know about that, right? We need to be aware. And I think that, like, we cannot turn a blind eye just because something is on our team. Anyway, thank you, gang. Thank you for being here. Thank you for coming. I won't end the stream. I know there's some people who want to talk, but if you need to go, I understand. I understand you got to go. But thank you for being here. If you like this content, hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube. If you're watching on Twitch or Kick, hit that follow button. Throw me some gift subs. Throw me some bits. Give me money, because that's what I care about more than any of you, is money, 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 okay?
True centrist right there.
I am just
Amen,
saying,
brother.
capitalism is based, and thank you for your support, financially and otherwise. Anyway, who's staying, who's going?
Money is the one true God.
I have to
Whick,
pee. I'll be right back, but...
I'm gonna Whick. We were gonna talk afterward, but
Yeah,
we can
briefly.
set it for another time.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna roll.
Okay,
But
gotta go.
shoot me a message, and if I'm around, we can hop back on. But it was a pleasure.
If
everyone.
I'd known that centrism was just liking money more than any of you guys, I would have been on board a long time ago. So
Amen.
that's a very fair parting note.
It's a long journey to the correct perspective on everything, but one day you shall all get there. All right. Peace, everyone.
See you later. You staying with us, Fair Queen, or you're dipping out?
I think I'm gonna dip, but thank you both. It was nice to meet you, 𝙠𝙚𝙗. It was nice to see you, Portland. I think we've communicated before, but I don't think I actually I've seen your face before or heard your voice. So it is very nice to officially meet you. And thank you once again, Whick, for a great night. Thank you, 𝙎𝙪𝙗, if you can hear me. Thank you all. I hope you have a wonderful night. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Have a good one.